Ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday. No, it's not. What am I thinking? It's Thursday. Oh my goodness.
I hate Mondays
already. It's Thursday. It's the Mattriarchy. I am, as typical, your host, Matt Rhys. I am joined today by Matt Crotts and number one Marmaduke fan.
Hey yo.
We all three are avowed Protestants, and today we're gonna talk about it for reasons.
Oh, the right geek is here. This is gonna be great.
Yeah, he's a dirty papist.
Oh, cool.
There you go. Which is grand. I love that, actually. I've been mistaken for Catholic in the past. So
the right geek and I just talked about what is it, the Way of X, and what we learned about in the Way of X is that according to Marvel, all of the Catholics are like dirty anti-mutant people who live in basements watching evil anti-mutant documentaries.
Oh my God.
So maybe she's right for converting.
Hello.
Oh,
This is our friend. This is also our friend Fly Fox Pro, coming to us on his political channel. Hello.
Hey, buddy. Uh-oh.
I'm not Protestant enough, he says.
Oh.
I thought about shooting.
He's like shared videos appearing in Protestant videos, though. So I don't know.
Well,
he's like one of those super Protestants. Like, no, don't draw Jesus. Nah, I don't want no drawings of Jesus. Thanks.
Well, with Fly Fox, he's been so busy with the political stuff. I didn't know if he'd have the spare time. So, I don't know if you guys have been following his Upon the Chaos channel, but he's been going crazy with that stuff. He's been.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Have you seen Fly Fox's comic?
Which one?
It's on Webtoons. I'm forgetting the title of it, but it's really kind of fun and interesting, sort of a stream of consciousness style comics. Let me see if I can find it on.
Because he's got a couple on there.
Yeah,
the one Peter the Problematic Person.
That's it. Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
I love it. I conned him into incorporating it into our universe.
Nice.
So there's actually a link off of our main page to it if you go to under our titles page.
Oh, cool.
How's the progress on your comic with Carl's Amateur Hour, by the way? That's set in Lincoln.
It is.
Welcome to Lincoln, Mr. Little.
Yeah. Welcome to Lincoln, Mr. Little. It is stymied in production hell because it's expensive and I don't have money.
Okay.
But that might be changing a little bit this year, so I'm hoping for 2022. So
you should have invested in Dogecoin.
Apparently.
I think we should have invested in number one Marmaduke fan because he's Mr. Fame. What happened?
My view, cryptocurrency.
I was like, oh wow, Marm's live. Let me check it out. Like 3,000 live viewers.
Yeah, it ended up being
it
ended up being like 50K live viewers.
Whoa!
I think it was like 8,000 simultaneous viewers, 300,000 viewers for the Josh Fest in total.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, what's up, DA?
But I'm not Josh anymore. That's the thing. That little Josh is the only Josh who's left.
I was wondering if you were allowed to still be Josh or not.
I mean, it kind of worked out. Like I was number one Josh Marmaduke fan, so I just lost my middle name. That's all.
Josh Marmaduke.
But so how did you do that? Like, was it like you just timed it right with some sort of Reddit post or something, and you just caught the wave as it was cresting? Like, what?
Yeah.
What happened?
So a year ago, I saw it trending because it had like its initial little, oh, haha, this is kind of funny. So a friend of mine named Josh invited me to the group, and I said yes. And I'm not that far away from it, so I was kind of planning to go anyway. And then it went viral again the week before it was about to happen. I'd almost forgotten that I'd signed up for it. Then I realized, oh yeah, I've been signed up for this the whole time. So for me, it was just like, well, of course I'm not going to miss this. It's just like a short little hop, skip, and a jump from where I'm at, right? Like there were people from New York and Washington, D.C. there. Yeah. And so I just once the internet reminded me that it was a thing, I just said, oh yeah. So I did a couple little prep videos. I got there like an hour early. I met Josh Swain. I didn't get that part on video because there was this I didn't think it was going to be that big at first. Like I saw like 10 guys hanging out in a random field there, like wandering around lost. And then just gradually more and more people started showing up. And I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be a thing. So better film as much as possible. And I think that like one of the funny things is like it's super lo-fi. Like the video quality started radically declining just as the fight was starting. I think because so many people were on their phones, but it was a really fun, just like old school, like people are showing up to do this kind of.
And I don't know if you're aware. I don't know, Marm, if you're aware of the web channel, the Wavy Web Surf. He does like internet history stuff.
What's it called?
Wavy Web
Internet
Surf.
History?
Yeah, Wavy Web Surf is the name of the channel. And he does like internet meme history and stuff. And he ended up grabbing, I think, some of your video and showing on his show talking about the history of Josh fight.
Nice. I have to go check that out.
He brought it up and he's bagging on it being Nebraska internet. And I'm just like, you jerk, but you're probably right.
The other one is someone did a great meme where it was instead of Drake and Josh, it was Josh v. Josh, and it had like the theme song from the show, and it had like audio of me playing. Like it's really surreal just hearing a meme out in the wild that isn't someone you know making it, and then suddenly you're in it. Like, whoa, wait a second, meme culture. Oh gosh, meme culture exists. I never thought of it until now. What was that guy's name again?
Wavy Web
Internet
Surf.
History. Wavy Webster. Okay. I see it. All right. I'll check that out. All right. So another little adventure in Marmaduke sort of tripping and falling over the YouTube algorithm. That's two in a row.
Well, not quite in a row, but close. Yeah.
Yeah, you've had some I love watching like just the internet history of you, Marm. It's so interesting. You know, like you did the CG thing for a bit, and then you did like there was some sort of like a mobile game that you blew up on with like 12-year-olds. Yeah,
Deltarune. That's it. Yeah,
okay. Deltarune. And then you dropped out, and then what? I guess you were doing like the process stuff for your comic, and then you did the Josh thing.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
Right. So like my attitude to YouTube is that I'm doing it for fun. So like if I get like algorithm magic, that's like gravy. But I have like my rule was I have to have fun making the video no matter what I make. So and then sometimes it's like little storybook things. Like I had some high school teacher or maybe like middle school teacher assign one of my videos for Japanese history or something. Like that's where like YouTube is run by Google, which is one of the evil like robot lizard overlord sites, but there is still kind of like this fun aspect to YouTube where it's like a lawless, just find something you can make that works culture. That's why I'm bugging you, Matt C, about you got to take your weird cryptic Islam knowledge and like make interesting history videos about like all of these antique Christian and pagan sources you know about, because there will be a niche for whatever like weird little subsection of human knowledge you know about. So
I think you're probably right, honestly. Like we tend to think that the internet is what we use it for, and then we forget to get outside of our bubble and realize that, you know, there's hundreds of people with like 100K plus subs, like just making weird niche content. That's pretty. You could almost call it mainstream YouTube. Is just weird niche content. And
I mean, like that's the thing about like the video platforms that I think in the next few years it won't just be YouTube pulling the thing, maybe 5 years, but with all internet streaming content that you have, what it comes down to the fact is it's like, you know, if you look at the transition that happened from over the air television to cable TV, where all of a sudden like there's a million shows, right, of program television. Like YouTube and online content is the next evolution in that circle, right? Is that the next phrase where it's like, well, it's even because like with cable, it's so diversified, all the program content, there's something for everyone. Well, you know, with YouTube, it's even more than that. It's something for everyone's everyone. You know, and it's not the same level of program content too, because it's, you know, pick as you want it, you know, Like if I, if you're like, I'm in the mood to watch this, well, you can just watch it. You don't have to wait for it to, you don't have to pull out the TV guide.
Yeah. I mean, it's like,
oh yeah. And Right Geek in the comments wrote, and he comes on my channel. Right. We're deep diving Iron Man comics and occasionally like weird new Iron Man content. Like the Right Geek does like really in-depth Iron Man content and kind of like deep dives on morals of stories. So I just want to give her a shout out for people.
Cool.
Like if you like Iron Man at all, or if you like just like thoughtful takes on narrative, check her out.
Marm, are you still doing? There was a guy you were teaming up with that did deep dives on what was it?
Thundercats.
There we go.
Right.
I mean, that was like last year.
Convoy's reviews.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we're still doing that about once a month. I think he's taking like a short break to do. He wants to teach himself animation, but he's still doing videos, and we still do the Thundercast, and that's a lot of fun too. Like basically, I find any way I can to troll him or bring up Thundercats roar at inappropriate moments. But that's a really really fun show.
That's a really low bar. They're all inappropriate moments.
Yeah, there's absolutely no right time to bring up Thundercats roar in polite
That's just
society.
being like, it'll be just like, hey, remember that time I dated your sister? Huh?
I'm one of the barbarian hordes engaging in the sack of Rome whenever I go on Lio Convoy Reviews show.
That's hilarious.
So yeah, kids, just like stay safe on the internet and find something that fits for you. That's Uncle Number One Marty Fan's advice for YouTube fame. There we go.
So yeah. I have a niche that no one asked to fill. I have a weekly long show where I just talk to people about stuff. So anyway,
yeah. Well, and you do it right. I said it last week, and I mean it. Like, there's a lot of shows we used to evaluate shows based on viewer counts, and now I think, at least in our circles and our ecosystem, now it's about quality. Quality of the chat, quality of the guests. It could be 20 people watching, it could be 10, but it's you get a good chat, you get good guests. So
I honestly think if I tried to play the algorithm, right? If I tried to look for trending stuff, I could probably nail audience a little better. But I also just don't care.
But it becomes a job. Yeah. Like if you're consciously trying to chase it, it's a job and you could have no fun.
Well, and
it.
like somebody,
do your thing.
I think it was Doug Ernst said to me, what you ought to do is chop it into sound bites and just put little short clips of your videos out there that are punchy. And I was like, yeah, that's not a bad idea there, Ernst, but I'm not doing it.
No.
That's something I kind of learned by accident, because it's like for people with a low attention span, you're trying to get like the golden like 30 seconds. But I don't know, like it's two different things, right? Like a long convo, the point of the long convo is to kind of like cover a bunch of topics. Like maybe if there was something like really fun, like I burst into flame or something live on air, then you'd want to clip that, right? Because that would be like, that's really interesting, right?
Except here's the problem with that: you're always an icon. So
right.
Even if you burst into flames, it would just be a bunch of screaming and then a whoosh noise.
Right.
It's not radio, people. Come on.
Well, I have a face for radio, so it works.
So do I. Look at this mug. Why do you think I'm hiding it behind all the hair?
I'm going to turn on I'm eating dinner, so tell me if you hear annoying smacks. I'm trying to stay away from them. But I'm going to turn on my
ASMR
camera.
video.
Yeah, it suddenly becomes an ASMR video. So,
well, do you think we'll get more viewers or less?
Oh, I have no.
When we go to our main topic,
that's the problem. The problem when we actually nailed screw down and start talking about substantive things instead of just like bullshit. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I have a hard time gauging that. It's one of those things where I just try to go with wherever's going and kind of tease things out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So the frustrating thing, one thing is I've been so busy this last week, I haven't confirmed anyone for next week for sure. So like Terry Mayo was going to come on sometime in May, but he hasn't gotten back to me when. So I need to bug him about it, but I haven't had a chance yet.
Mm-hmm.
Which is cool because I'm like, I love his books. So it'll
Terry
be cool to have him
Mayo.
on.
What has he done?
The Wicked Righteous.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
Yeah,
seen that
just-
around.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. It's a really brutal and like honest look at like human evil. So
Ooh.
and like the premise of the story is that it's a world where all the adults got sick and they like suddenly like and died from some weird ailment, and only criminals and children survived. And so not in this area, the whole world, but in all of America. And so it follows this group of this family of these four brothers as they try to make their way through this post-apocalypse that's this apocalyptic wasteland, Southern California, that's populated by children and bad people. So
Yeah.
All right, I've actually bought a couple issues of it, but it's in my giant stack of comics to get to, so I'll be sure to check it out now.
yeah, it is. I also have a giant stack of comics to get to, including Red Rooster.
Oh, good grief! Yeah,
I haven't read yet.
Do you have the
Finally
Walmart
came.
edition or do you have the Indiegogo edition?
I have the Indiegogo edition.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I couldn't bring myself to buy anything. I couldn't bring myself to buy anything from it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a whole story. But I do want to have I was telling it was last week before. But Twitless is raring to have an online conversation about it. So I need to read it so we can go ahead and
I heard it was actually pretty good writing.
I know I read
See,
the first issue.
Have either of you gotten like the skinny from Pellegrini about Red Rooster?
Yes.
Yeah, because I like when I first reviewed it, like I didn't know any of the behind the scenes stuff. So the kind of like interesting behind the scenes stuff is Pellegrini laid out the story, and then he got credited as the scripter, but the script was different than what he submitted. So he didn't get credited for the thing he did, and he got credited for something that he did that got changed. So like there's some like weird behind the scenes. I don't know. There's some weird behind the scenes stuff about Red Rooster. Like the sad thing is, I actually kind of like it. I just don't like the unprofessionalism of it being in Walmart before it goes out to your backers. And like in every review I've done of it, I've said, like that's kind of like an embarrassingly bad thing to do. But I also that what bugs me is I still like the substance of it. Like it'd be so much easier if I could just read it and hate it and just say, oh yeah, this is dumb and I don't like how it was handled professionally. But now I've got the situation where there's like an unprofessional aspect to how how the owners handled it, but I actually kind of like I like the idea of it, kind of like a serious take on the Golden Age hero, basically.
Well, I read the first issue's worth because to his credit, they sent out the chapters to the backers in digital form.
Yeah.
And I read the first one and I hated it. I thought it was pretty close to trash.
Oh no.
Yeah. So that's a thing. But with it, I haven't read the rest of it. So I mean, just because like something starts rough doesn't mean it doesn't end that way, or that could be a whole sort of thing. But I'm gonna go ahead and read it, and I'll probably do a quickie review on my channel here, and then I also have I want to do a stream that's just a Red Rooster conversation stream sometime soon, but I haven't got that set up yet. I don't know. So
it's kind of a weird. I feel like we're kind of traveling back in time because there's campaigns from 2018 and 2019 that are fulfilling now, and now we're finally getting these things reviewed, which is kind of funny. So it's like, oh yeah, Red Rooster. Like I'd really like to move on, but it's only just now getting into people's hands, and I'm also wondering, like, okay, was it well written? Is it well drawn? We can only now know.
Well,
so
yeah. I mean, and that's, I gotta complain. Like the stuff that I thought was trash was nothing to do with the art, right? I thought the art was above top notch, right? I mean, I like Mitch's style. I like Betty's style artistically, but it was the first issue read just like every other, like tone deaf rehashing of Watchmen. That it was friggin' Heroes in Crisis. It was the Identity Crisis. It was Heroes Reborn. It was Civil War. It's just the same, desperate attempt to recapture somebody else's magic.
And you always run into the problem that it's Red Rooster is supposed to be Captain America plus Batman plus Superman, right? Yeah. Like he's supposed to evoke these old characters you have a connection to, but he's not one of these old characters you have a connection to. So like a meta story about Superman works better because I know who Superman is. It's kind of like when you're creating your own character. Maybe it's not the time to do a meta. Now, what's interesting is T-Bird and Throttle does do a meta story on superheroes, but it's sort of like the meta story on superheroes. It's not about the meta point. It's more about I want to tell a hero's journey with the superhero, kind of like after Watchmen. So it's less a commentary on Watchmen and more an answer to Watchmen. So something about it works. Like when you get to the end of it, you say, "Oh wow, this feels like a really cool new superhero who I never heard about, and I want to see more. I want to see the next adventure." Hey, everybody hasn't gotten to theology yet? No. This is we're YouTubers. We're supposed to chat about 20 minutes about things that have nothing to do with what we're talking about.
Pussyfooting around.
So I do have a question though before we jump out. And once again, I want to clearly state my opinion is based on the first issue of Red Rooster that was available as the online download. I did not read the second because I was super pissed by that point in my life, and I haven't read the book that they sent me, which is a whole deal. But that's a whole, which is surprising in itself, but that's a whole deal. But I do have one question before we get on track and really crack that whip. You just did a review on T-Bird and Throttle. Was that on the complete 3-volume collection or what?
Correct. It collects issues 1 through 4.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I started picking up the Alterna big books, and they've only released one. And I don't know what their publication schedule is because they've gone kind of weird on stuff. Like, they're not doing like pre-sales on anything anymore.
Ooh, I gotta go check with. So wait, so if I go to my comic book shop and say, hey, can I pre-order an Alterna comic? Will they like not be able to do that anymore?
There's no place for pre-orders anymore. They've announced they're going exclusively through like crowdfunding as like a sales platform. So I don't know what the heck that means. But
well, that's really interesting because they were supposed to always be the leg into the comic book shop, where people really felt like that's still the way to be legit, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and
actually, doesn't feel that way anymore.
Yeah, I don't know. So, anyway, so I hope that they finish that out because I'm excited to read all of it. But
sure,
I'll probably read the first volume next week when I sit down to read Red Rooster. So, anyway, so Marmaduke, why the heck are you a Protestant?
Well, I was raised that way. Well, kind of like when I was raised in kind of like I guess what would it be? It was a very stereotypical like independent fundamentalist Baptist upbringing, right? And then what's kind of interesting is then I had like I went off to college. I kind of like had my crisis of faith, like, oh man, what if atheism is true, right? So I like read all the books and tried to like I guess like I reached the point where I made my faith my own. And then my home church kind of like gradually moved out of fundamentalism. So it was kind of interesting that it moved in the direction I was moving very naturally. So it just kind of worked out. I went to school for a while. I'm back at my home church. I think for me, the important point about Protestantism is I think basically Protestantism got the doctrine of justification right. And I've tried. I have read some Catholics. Like I've read a lot of Peter Kreeft. I've read some G.K. Chesterton. Like G.K. Chesterton's like a gift with just like his ability to use turns of phrase. But I really haven't found the Catholic who's able to interact with the Protestant tradition on justification. So I guess like I'm not a Protestant just by being raised that way. I'm a Protestant by conviction at this point.
Okay. That's a good startup, but I have further questions on that. But before we get into that, Matt, why are you a Protestant?
Yeah, I guess I well, kind of a similar, well, kind of the opposite story. I was raised Unitarian and then Methodist, which are both pretty much equally at this point the opposite spectrum of fundamentalist Baptist.
Definitely.
But I became Christian trying to date. I was atheist in high school and I was trying to date a girl. And she said that she'd go on a date with me if I go to her Bible study and all this sort of thing, which is a terrible idea, but I guess it worked. I mean, we only dated for like 1 month. It was a horrible relationship, but I actually heard the gospel and I heard it from, she was going to like one of these, independent Baptist churches. It's not something like, I just thought, Christians just believe chicken soup for the soul, I guess, with therapeutic moralism. Because that's all you get, at least in my Methodist experience, and certainly in Unitarian, it's just legalism. It's so funny. It's just different variants. You always think of legalism being a right wing thing or something, and it's maybe they talk about it that way because some of there's enough of it in more conservative circles that you can debate it, I guess, but all of leftism is legalism. In my experience, it's all.
This is true. This is true.
So there's no way to debate it because you can't be within that frame set and then still disagree, I guess.
Well,
there's no internal disagreement on that topic. It's just kind of closed and converged.
To do a little bit of political theory in all of this, I think the difference between left and right isn't the concept of legalism. It's that it's the concept of belonging, right? So in right, because we're more individualistic, we're more about free will, we're more about identity, like individual identity, not group identity, right? The idea is that here's the rules, and if you abide by the rules or don't abide by the rules, that's on you, and you got to deal with it. Whereas on the left, it's like, well, if you don't abide by the rules, you can't be part of us. We have to entirely ostracize you if you don't abide by the rules. Well, on the right, it's like, well, maybe you're not part of us, but we're not going to hunt you down and force you by gunpoint, and badly badly paraphrase Orwell, right? The sound of a boot crushing a human face forever.
Yeah.
Right. That's what the left really offers.
I also think maybe for any historically aware Christian, we have not too far long ago, we have memories of Catholics burning Protestants at the stake and Protestants burning Catholics at the stake. So we kind of have a baked in, how about we not burn each other at the stake mentality. I think that's the closest thing liberalism has to offer us, right? Where we kind of resonate with it. Yeah. Whereas for secularists, I don't think secularists have had their moment where they say, "Oh yeah, we shouldn't burn each other at the stake yet." They're they're still in their doctrinaire phase.
Right. But here's the thing with that, right? That's part of what America was here for, right? America was here because we're like, hey, we won't burn you to the stake. Oh, hey, all the Huguenots and all the Quakers and all the Irish Catholics, they came here and maybe they didn't get along, but at least they weren't killing each other openly, right? They weren't arranging themselves into lines and marching through the street to kill each other. I mean, and it took in certain places it took some time. Not going to say it didn't. New York City's gangs were partially religiously just split up in the 1820s through 40s, right? Yeah. But with that, that's something that that level of tolerance is part of the American system, and the secularists had their moment to realize that. It was called World War II, and after that, all of Soviet Russia, right? These secularist worldviews that are about enlightenment, supposedly about enlightenment of the human being to create the new socialist man, when it didn't work, and that should have been.
It's hard to be like a progressive optimist, even after like World War I. That kind of shot progressive optimism in the balls a little bit, and then World War II was like a second shot that like science and liberalism isn't fixing the problem of human sin, right?
And that's the problem. See, the secularist idea can't accept the idea of human sin. It's not it's not an ingredient in the mix.
Can I say I think the way the secular progressivism the march continues because they successfully managed to frame all the bad guys of World Wars I and II as members of the
Germans.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, exclusively, so that they didn't have to have any self-reflection.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And even the fact when they were like saying, "Oh no, Hitler was on the right," even back in the 60s, this was going on. Hitler was on the right because Stalin was on the left, and we liked Stalin because look at how well Russia's doing. I've seen the future, and it works. Remember? That was like the Pulitzer Prize winning article in what, 59, 61, something like that. I've seen the future, and it works. And it was describing the Soviet like work camps. Meanwhile, Solzhenitsyn's writing the Gulag Archipelago because it doesn't work.
Well, New York Times would do puff pieces on Hitler and Mussolini back in the day. There was like a brief window of time where fascism was, oh wow, we want a scientific way of governing people. This fascism, it seems so scientific. It gets the trains to arrive on time, right? It's only with like the benefit of hindsight, and you see like the massive pile of dead bodies. You say, "Oh, gee, why didn't people back then know that was wrong?" Right?
Yeah, if I was back then, I wouldn't have. Yeah.
Well, and then like somebody, I can't remember who it was, on Twitter this morning, I think it was, came up and said, "Well, hey, wait a second. People see you guys. Everybody likes to say how did the Holocaust happen? There's 1.7 million Uyghurs being incarcerated, for just not being Han in China today. Oof. And what are we doing about it?
Yeah.
And
we're cutting black people out of Star Wars movies to appeal to appease the Chinese audience is what we're doing.
Could you imagine like 1938 America being like, can we make Star Wars a little less Jewish for the Germans? Like, that's kind of what's going on. Oh, it's terrible.
So from the chat, Star says that guy about I've seen the future is from the New York Times, and for that alone, it should be abolished. So, and mandatory pictures of gulags while studying the Communist Manifesto. I agree. Unfortunately, they won't let me near other people's children in terms of an educational context because I'm kind of a radical. Anyway.
Oh, we got an F in the chat. Is that for DA Talks' calling us unbased, or we're still live? Yeah,
we are still live. I don't know. I don't know what it's not. I don't have to. Anyway, I'm sorry, DA. So back to we got way off topic, and it was entirely my fault. Did the stream get struck? Oh, I don't know.
We mentioned World War II, and that's enough.
Apparently,
Oh my
I'm
goodness.
as far as I know, we're still live.
Did we say all the
Let me
words?
take
We said all the bad words.
We
Hitler
do,
was bad. YouTube thinks, oh no, they mentioned Hitler. Oh no.
yeah. Well, I don't know. I guess I'm going to keep going because why not? Oh, okay.
It looks okay. It looks okay when I bring it up on my webpage. You're
DA
still live,
Talks
says
is
DA
still
Talks.
live,
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so back to point. We were talking about why you're Protestant, and you said the girl, and you stuck around for the doctrine. So what was it? What was it about the gospel that made it seem compelling even after the lady walked away?
Well, so part one was hearing it and then kind of digging it, but I was still partying pretty heavily, and I just got really high one weekend at a party, and I felt like I was gonna die. And I felt like I guess I was running away from a lot of crap in my life, with my father and a lot of other problems. And I guess sometimes you substance abuse to get farther from your problems, and then sometimes you realize the more you abuse, like the more it actually exposes you to those problems, I guess. And so I was just kind of sitting there, more exposed than ever, staring at my problems and just like, you know what, God, like if I die, like I totally get it, man. Like, and if you send me to the bad place, I get that too. But if you don't, if I wake up tomorrow, then just I guess you own me at that point. So that's kind of how it went,
Wow.
And it's a journey for everybody. I was still a weirdo, but
life has a way of impacting people, even if like for people, like for me, I was raised Christian, right? So there was like this very early childhood experience of it. It's sort of like, I've noticed with a lot of like my friends who've converted to Christianity, there's like a common thread of life threw them a curveball, and it's sort of like that forced them to confront the claims of Christ.
Yeah. Well, I actually think that there's there's a divide in evangelical circles anyway about salvation stories. You've got Marm and me. I was also raised in a very churched environment, and my conversion experience was realizing my mortality at 5, right? And I'm like, I knew I was going to die. I knew I had an immortal soul, and I knew that I was rotten, like I was a corrupt person. So I'm like, their judgment awaits me if I don't square it with the Creator. And so I knew that. And but I was very young for it. But the same thing. So there's one branch of there's one branch of like I said, of these, especially in evangelical circles, where it's like I grew up and I had this very early faith experience, and that's stuck. And then the other branch is people like I said, that life knocks around. And I think it's interesting too, though, because I also have this suspicion, and when it comes to I don't know where you guys stand on like gifts of the Spirit, but I'm not a cessationist. But looking at the history of missions, new mission fields tend to elicit the miraculous, right? So those people who haven't had the chance to get to grow up immersed in the Word, that's not part of their society. Those are the places where you see speaking in tongues, you see a lot of healing, you see people being raised from the dead. And it's a very well documented history from the late 1800s to the early 1900s during the massive mission expansion. That I think that also mirrors those sort of two paths of the either you grow up surrounded by the truth and you say, yes, this is the truth and I embrace it, or God's got to use the machine of the world to knock some sense into you. So I think there's a parallel in that.
I'll just mention this again. Since Matt C's face revealed, I'll say this again. I'm always disappointed that Matt C isn't a 7-foot tall biracial Lycedonian man, like from Kyrie, which is a great comic. That's why I'm not going to face reveal. It's because you're all going to be disappointed that that I'm not a cartoon dog in real life.
So yeah. Now we went so far afield, I forgot something I was going to ask Marmaduke. Okay.
Well, I know that Matsy wanted to do like an inquisition. On behind the scenes.
It was just about your Josh fight. Virality. That was just amazing. So
I would like to say I don't think we have enough inquisitions, but that's a different story.
Was it about cessationism?
No, it wasn't. It was I just brought that up as a parallel, looking at the disparate types of conversion stories. So,
well, for me, it was like a how to read book that was about the plagues of Egypt with like a really famous Christian illustrator. And it was like wow. C. Jane Run level reading, but the story of the plagues. And that was like my introduction to the concept of death. And so I asked my mom, wait a second, will I die? Will I go to hell? And that was kind of like my introduction to the gospel talk. Yeah. So one of the things I appreciate about Protestantism is I think Protestantism does have a really close connection to the idea of the gospel as something like even a child could understand. Whereas I think that the Orthodox and the Catholics kind of pose like a twin or parallel problem to us. But for both of them, just like my experience knowing Catholics and knowing Orthodox, their tradition and their culture is sort of absolutely critical to their understanding of the faith. And you can have like little liberal Protestants who have no connection to a gospel message, but I think it's within Protestantism that you can find an emphasis on the gospel as like something that is of central importance to everything we talk about.
Yeah. Well, our modern Protestantism, and this is something to point out, because Protestantism has actually existed forever, right? There's branches of the church that didn't quite agree with official church doctrine, and some of them had their doctrine good, and some of them had their doctrine not so good. But modern Protestantism all springs from a post-Gutenberg world, a world where literacy was not only common, but growing to be ubiquitous, right? Because literacy is more common in the ancient world and in the medieval world than we like to think about, than we've been told for the last 50 years. But it was more limited, and it wasn't as broad. People could read and write enough to do business transactions and to do figures and to do taxes, but most of them were not reading novels. Very few of them were writing novels, because it really wasn't, there was so much effort involved in hand literacy that it made more sense to make that part of a specialized class. But with
and you had to literally pay for someone to copy a book, right? So that put a little bit of a financial limit on owning books. That's one of the reasons why a lot of the old books would collect Christian books and maybe like not necessarily biblical books together. Because if you had the books, right, you might as well bind them together, and they would sort of think of a book more as a library, right? Like the cover didn't make it a book. The cover just protected all of your books together, which could include like your interesting little letters or your Apostles' Creed or what have you.
Yeah. Yep. Very true. Very true. And a lot of times the monasteries became libraries for the same reason.
Yeah.
Where the wealthy patrons would keep their stuff at the monastery rather than at their homes.
I'm going to derail you guys again. Kimosabi says, Matt, turn your camera off. You're too handsome and it's distracting.
Kimosabi, I've always been jealous. When you did the face reveal, you are a bear of a man, sir. And it's all I can do to live up to that.
But I think so the one of the things about, back to the subject of Protestantism books, because we've lived in a like I said, the world of literature, and started coming. It was modern Protestantism. Protestantism was born in this age of literature, and it started coming to its full, during the Enlightenment, right? In fact, a lot of ways the Reformation and the push toward everybody to start reading their Bible pushed the Enlightenment in a lot of ways, and that's one of those things that has left, I think, a more of an emphasis upon the reason behind the faith, and also that idea that the story of salvation is something that can be learned like a story, learned can be learned like a piece of literature, right? Yeah. In a way that I think that the big O Orthodox churches are intended, and specifically the liturgy is worked to make it an experiential knowledge, so that the traditions are an intrinsic part of it, because people were living out those experiences through fasts and living out
and the liturgy itself.
Yeah, through the liturgy itself. And liturgy not just being the order of service like we have in a lot of low liturgy Protestant churches. It's our liturgy is just an order of service, but the high liturgy of the big O churches, it's the year-long order of service, and what is preached at what week, and how those work into the fasts and the festivals, and how that dictates the way art is done to decorate the inside of a church. I've got a buddy down in Kearney who's a member of the Russian Orthodox Church there, and they just had, it's probably been 7 years ago. I went down to visit him just before Orthodox Easter, and we hung out and talked about all kinds of stuff. But they had just gotten, a bunch of the people from their local congregation had put aside a bunch of money to redecorate the inside of the church, and they hired this iconographer from Europe to come in and do it. Nice. The place was gorgeous, with gold leaf put on there, and new frescoes added, and old frescoes rejuvenated, and it's amazing. But it's the entire Bible. I mean, not literally everything, but the entire story of salvation, from the garden to the cross to the coming to the coming of Christ, done on the walls. I mean, you can literally walk somebody through the road to the message on the road to Emmaus on the church walls.
It's almost like the East is less interested in this idea of we need to debate what the Bible is about. It's almost like, well, we've got what the Bible is about in our beliefs, in our art, and in our liturgy, right? And it's like a very Western thing to want to debate it out in the marketplace of ideas.
Well, I mean, the other thing is that debate isn't for the church floor. Debate is for the pub afterwards. That's where I've sat down with the most of them. The service is different than, just like they in their church, their liturgy. I mean, not their liturgy. Their homilies aren't studies of the scripture. They're just lessons that are portrayed as is. And if you want to study, come into the study before Vespers on Monday evening. If you want to dig deep, that's not for Sunday morning. That's for the rest of the week.
I do respect, when it comes to the Orthodox approach. I'm pretty orthophilic, I guess. I dig what they're doing a lot more than at least Roman Catholicism, as I understand it. So,
yeah.
Including
Vicky Verse says Eastern Orthodox debates. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
Vicky Verse says Eastern Orthodox debates just like everyone else. So I'm not saying Eastern Orthodox don't debate. I'm almost saying when I've listened to Eastern Orthodox, it's sort of a big point for them is always, well. Oh, great. Luna's here. My cat Luna's here. Well, when I've talked to Eastern Orthodox or Russian Orthodox, a big point is always well, there's this Western mindset that Westerners have. And if you have a Western mindset, it's sort of hard for you to step outside and look at what the Western mindset is, because that's just the way, you don't think about the way you think, right? That starts getting a little too meta for people. So Anyway, so sorry, I just thought that was kind of like an interesting, like maybe like counterpoint from Vicky.
Well, and I say, and I think I have a easy time understanding what you're getting at. I think because coming from like an Irish cultural background, we fight all the time about everything. So I was Welsh and Irish growing up. My parents, bickered about whose heritage was better and the whole thing. And it was I'm used to fighting. That's part of my blood. So I can definitely see that when it comes to a lot of the kind of things. One of the things I've had to learn as I've grown up is that, some things are worth fighting over and some things everyone's just wrong about. And so then there's questions about is this salvific and how big is God's grace? Right. Like I know people that I don't buy the perpetual virginity of Mary for a second, but the arguments for it, they make sense. Do they affect the person of Christ? No. Do they affect the salvific work of Christ? No. Do they affect the nature of faith itself? No. I got to lay it on. I have to back off of that subject. I mean, I understand it. And if you want to talk about why I think X or Y about it, that's cool. But you got it. I mean, you can't. I don't think it's worth. I don't think you can get start mad and start excommunicating people from the fellowship of believers over that. I think you got to say, yeah. I think that's what it is. So.
I remember Matsy was specifically looking for people to debate the perpetual virginity of Mary with him.
Well, then I realized some of my backers are Roman Catholic, and then I also realized debates are left for Facebook. That's what you do there. Yeah. It's not for Twitter. So I just backed off instantly. Like some very nice and the very temptation people sent me videos, and I was like, oh, well, thank you for being nice and not just memeing me. And I just couldn't do it.
So we also have like this businessman problem where like we want customers, right? So like the temptation is always be to like the basic like, oh yeah, I sure love Jesus. I'll be unspecific about that, right? I love the Judeo-Christian worldview. How's that for as unspecific as possible? I almost kind of like it if like a Catholic just says, yeah, I'm a Catholic. All right, I'm not a Catholic, but if you've got a comic, sure, I'll check out your comic, right?
And see,
like
and
I'm always at the.
Here's one of the things I will say. One of the things I will say that will come to that whole part of the whole question we've talked about. One of the things that I really think that and I think this comes back to the literary nature. Believe it or not, I think this comes back to the literary nature of not the Bible, because the Bible is literary, but the Western tradition is so drenched in this literary nature. I mean, I think that that Protestantism doesn't get the mythology of the church, right?
Mythology of the church,
the mythology of the church, and I don't mean in terms of like we talk about West. I mean, because what a myth is. Okay, myth is a story that we tell that really tells us something that you can't tell in a story, right? Right. It's a way of taking the abstract knowledge and then abstracting that in a way that it can be digested. It's like that's what parables are, and their way you feel it, right? So even if it's not, even in a story that's not true, it's still true because that's the nature of mythology. Even if it didn't happen, it's still true. And part of the beauty of the Bible is it did happen, but it's still myth. It's still myth, right? It's still a myth, even though it happened. And that's the Christ is the miracle of Christ is that he is the sign and the signified, right? The only thing in existence that's like that. He is
very Tolkien.
That's just what he is. So
Tolkien and Lewis, right? So sorry, I want to let you finish your thought, but it's almost like Tolkien and Lewis have kind of been a bridge for Catholics and Protestants to let us talk about the same thing with two recent Christians in our history. But so, like, where are you going with this in relation to the importance of the myth?
Well, I think that I think you're right with Tolkien and Lewis being that, but there's still some of the big conflict between Protestants and Catholics is I think Catholics get the mythology right, but don't always get necessarily the doctrine right. And I think Protestants get the doctrine right at the sake of forsaking some of the mythology. We don't understand like the nature of like for the example, the idea that the Eucharist is just a symbol, right? that can't possibly be true. Now, I don't believe in transubstantiation in the Catholic sense, but there's something else that has to go on in the Eucharist, right?
How many debates in church history are over substantive issues, and how many of them are people talking past each other, right? Because if you say it's a symbol, someone could hear in that, oh, you're saying it's merely a symbol. And even if I believe it's a symbol, I don't want to say it's merely a symbol because Christ instituted it, right? Like the substantive issue is whether there is significance to, I don't know. That almost would be like where church history comes back into it, right? Like, does it need to physically transfer into the blood and body of Christ? Is it enough for it to just sort of spiritually be like Calvin thought that it could have there could be like a spiritual presence without a transubstantiation, right? Mm-hmm. And it's also kind of one of the tragedies of church history, I think, is sometimes there is a substantive issue where we actually do agree over a substantive point. And sometimes it feels like it's just a difference of emphasis where one side thinks one side is legalist and one side thinks one side is antinomian, and maybe like the full complexity of their worldview is getting lost in sort of just the threat that, we're also political opponents. Like Martin Luther was a political opponent to the Italian papal politics, as well as a theological opponent to them. Reiki says, speaking as a Catholic, we do have that element based in experience, yes, but we have a intellectual tradition too. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Well, and I wouldn't, and I'm not trying to be dismissive of that at all, because I'm not trying to say like Catholics aren't thinking. That's the last thing I'm trying to say. Especially if you talk to a lot of Protestants, where there's an emotional connection to the salvific message, but the discussion of doctrine is just so divorced from that it stops being something that's just lived, like with the whole person, and becomes something that's lived in the mind, right? And that's one of the dangers, I think, of the Protestant tradition, is that we forget that the whole of us, that we are a holistic being. God made us as one being. So, and I think that's like talking over the nature of fasting with my Orthodox friend. Like that's one of the reasons that the Orthodox Church fasts, and I'm sure a lot of Catholic churches are the same way. But the order of the fast is to reinforce in the body the truths that they're going through in the liturgy, and we don't have that in the West. And I'm not saying in the Protestant Church, and I'm not saying that we necessarily should mirror that exactly, but I think we need to be aware of it. And there's a reason that fasting is talked about in the scriptures. And I think, like in my tradition growing up, we missed out on that because we were discussing the minutia of a doctrine that is important, of doctrines that are important but are not exclusive.
Well, so I've got a question. So now that we're entering, I think we could probably all agree that the 21st century is a lot more interested in mythology in all the ways we've defined it, finding myths that are symbolically true and kind of pattern arcs for our own lives, and everyone's kind of running around trying to find the right myth, I guess, that's going to work for them, which is particularly in the West, and it's getting more and more frantic as people find more and more alternatives, I guess, competing alternatives to what sort of myths they're going to take. So is the church going to get more mythic to respond to that? Like, how do we live in a more mythic world, I guess?
So, and here's, well, I'll let Marmaduke talk first.
Okay. Well, can I throw in one thing? Because people in the chat are talking about Jonathan Pageau, who he's Eastern Orthodox, and I think, and he's like, million sub kind of guy. I think he's probably the most famous Christian who interacts with Jordan Peterson, though there's a lot of people that kind of jumped in when Peterson was kind of doing pointing out kind of the mythic significance of Jesus in a way, in like that, 19th century psychologist kind of approach.
Yeah.
And a lot of people said, yes, and like, let's run with that, So a lot of Christians kind of jumped in and kind of got in Peterson's circle. And Pageau I think he's been able to be the most successful probably because he's Eastern Orthodox, so that he they're so saturated in a mythic reality and framing for things that they can see our very contemporary struggles in that they can see the mythic pattern underneath it quicker than maybe the average or even the above average Protestant can.
Yeah.
And so that's probably what he's doing. I don't know how the Eastern Orthodox Church in the West, I don't know if it's growing. My understanding is it's just strong and stable, but a minority, in a sea of evangelicalism and weird non-denominational offshoots that die out every 10 years. So, but I don't know, like, I'm just wondering, like, as the world gets more mythic and everyone's kind of pulling out axioms from anywhere and everywhere with which they're going to build their mythic universe, like, how do we talk, how do we dialogue with that, I guess, and how do we deal with that ourselves? Like, do we need to talk differently amongst ourselves in light of that? Maybe it's awakening something that we've lost, like you were saying, Matt. So I'll throw that back to y'all.
Well, maybe how much of it is, do we, like, when you interact with people outside of your tradition, you tend to interact with the smart people outside of your tradition, right? So, like, I would guess that Catholics go to Catholic Mass and they meet like the regular old Catholics, and they meet like the big brain Catholics, right? And if Orthodox meet like the regular old Orthodox and the big brain Orthodox. So kind of like my frame of reference is I have in mind kind of like the regular old Protestants and some of the big brain Protestants. So Matt, what it seems like you're getting at is if maybe there's almost like a problem in Protestantism where we're very like straightforward. We want to get it right? Like we want to get the doctrine right. We want to like read the Bible right. And is this a Protestant problem or is this a conservative problem where maybe there's almost like a blindness to the aesthetic or artistic dimension of things? Like my kind of thought would be, it's good to start with like the plain, simple truth, like start with the childish truth or the truth that is kind of like at the most bare bones, like what is the story even about? And then from there kind of grow to the more artistic or more complex thing. Because maybe like one problem is like for an intellectual, like the Jordan Peterson, whoa, it's like an amazing interconnected myth thing could almost take priority. Like you could be interested in the Bible as just like this phenomenally complicated book without any concern for actually believing the thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which is, I think that's that impasse, isn't it? That's the Jordan Peterson, the cliff with, he can only take you to the cliff. He can't, he himself isn't going to jump off it.
Well, and nobody can. I mean, that's like when it comes down to it, that's the spirit, right? I mean, like that's what God does. God presents himself as the sacrifice. I mean, it's Abraham on the mountain every day, right? All we can do is present the thing and submit to the trust that the Creator knows what he's doing, and he will make himself the sacrifice. That's what he does. And so you can't reason or logic anyone into the kingdom, right? It doesn't work that way. And I think that's one.
Maybe that's what we've tried to do.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that, like, you get back to Francis of Assisi, right? Preach the gospel always, and when necessary, use words, right? And that's one of those things that, like, back to the whole conservative thing, right? Leftist believers get mad because part of the conservative vision of the world is a world in which everybody is free to pursue their own ends and to reap their consequences and to not be burdened by it. And then they say, well, charity is a Christian impulse. Why aren't you being more charitable? And I'm like, it's not your business what I'm being. We're talking about what the government does, right? My giving is between me and God, and it's not between me and you. So
like, is that
why are you
pajama
having the
boy
government
meme?
come in with guns and take my stuff?
That pajama boy meme. I don't believe in the Bible, but maybe if I quote it, you'll do what I want you to do.
Right. But I mean,
man.
that's an argument that happens, and I think between really sincere people talking about, well, and then, but the other side of it too is I don't believe it's right to force non-believers to line up with what the Bible tells me to do. Right. so I don't think it's easy to force. But that's a side note.
That's going to set you up. Well, I was hoping we could get to like talking about Bruce Jenner for governor or something. Something very topical, because that's going to set you aside from most Republican types, I guess, at least old guard Republicans. It's still probably majority Republicans, I think, where there's this unclear, and I think again, like Eastern Orthodox have a better view of this. Some Protestant traditions have a better view of this. I don't think Roman Catholics have a clear view at all of this, and most evangelicals don't either. Of what do you do with the state and people who aren't Christian? Can you just like, where do you go? Do you force them to live under Christian laws, or is there some sort of biblical way where you can say, like, oh, well, look, here's in Genesis, there's a more basic view of us all.
That's like, actually
is for this, but it's not. You
don't even need any of that, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell me what legal structure. Tell me what governmental structure is mandated in the New Testament. What government structure did Jesus give us?
Did Jesus or did the Old Testament give us?
New Testament, Jesus.
All right. Well, render unto Caesar what is Caesar, and render unto God what is God.
That's the only thing he said. He said, submit to the ruling authorities. He said that no power exists except God places it there. Right. So that's it. Right? We live in a country where we're supposed to be self-governing. That's the theory, right? So that just means that, like, whatever we're doing and whatever we do, we are to do unto God. But the authorities that exist, even if I hate them, God placed them there for His glory and purpose. We need to be willing to submit to those things, at least somewhat. But at the same time, we're self-ruling, we're self-governing, we have a voice, and we should make that voice known and all that other kind of stuff like that too. But when it comes to, we don't like the specific religious requirements to say, do you want to be a good person? Those aren't governmental requirements. They're between you and the Creator, right? Mm-hmm. So when God says that the drunkards will not inhabit the kingdom of God, right? Well, that doesn't mean that Joe down the street shouldn't do what the hell he wants. That's between him and God.
He shouldn't be arrested for drinking in his home. Yeah,
he should not be arrested for drinking in his home.
Yeah,
so maybe to throw a curveball. To throw a curveball, I've been trying to read some of the theonomists to get like a feel for different answers to this problem.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So like, I've mainly been trying to like read Rushdoony, and I'm saying trying to read because it's a little difficult to read him. I think because he's the kind of guy who has like 100 thoughts that are parallel to one another, and it's a little hard to get to like interpret him down to like one thought or one argument. It's sort of like he sees like 1,000 things all at the same time that he's saying, see, this is the problem with the secular culture, and here's why it's like one of the things he's famous for is like the Christian homeschool movement. And I think he made the prediction that public schools were eventually going to banish from the public schools any kind of like Christian creedal teaching, right? So this would be like back in the 1950s. He was making these kinds of predictions, but then his solution would be basically like a very rigorous, very specifically like Calvinist private school system. I'm trying to like get it down. So it's sort of like the thing I like about Rushdoony is that he's actually like predicting the problem correctly, where the secular culture can't have no religion. They're going to substitute it with their own religion. But maybe the problem I have with Rushdoony is he just assumes that the biblical law is going to be really easy to interpret and administer. And so sometimes this will lead to things where he'll just say, well, this is the way the biblical law should be. And I just I haven't read his book yet, but I've like listened to his lectures, and especially in his lectures, it'll be like, okay, that's interesting, but like, where is the biblical justification for that, right? Like, I think that theology collapsed because it's one thing to say we need God's law. It's another thing to say how specifically will we apply God's law in our situation.
And like, there's no, I mean, you could spend your entire lifetime looking for that mandatory minimum speed limit, right, for school zones in the Holy Writ, and you're not going to find it. But there ought to be some sort of speed limit in school zones, right? I think everybody can agree to that.
Right, and we can get so maybe like how much of this is common grace, like how much of this is stuff we're just going to get from our reason, and how much of it is this going to be things that we point directly to the Bible. So you could like point to the Bible and say there are biblical laws that talk about, setting up guardrails on your roof. Why? Because in biblical times you would go stand on your roof all day, so they want you to have guardrails up there. We don't stand on our roofs these days, but you can sort of see like how there's a principle there of you actually should be concerned for other people's safety. Hyper libertarianism, anarchy.
If I want to stand on my roof, I will. Anyway, that's why I have a roof, for goodness sakes. No, but seriously, the other thing I think is that when it comes to it, I think that one of the things that we forget is that when it comes to the idea of like, how does God's laws impact our daily life, right? If we're faithful, then we'll seek to find his truth in that. But beyond that, there are some things that are just true because there are many things that are just true because they're true, right? Like my belief in that murder is wrong and my belief in self-defense are both rooted in my belief in the Imago Dei, right? So, actually, I gotta interrupt myself for a second here. Right Geek has a great comment. Great comment. It's not coming up for me. Come on. There it goes. To be perfectly honest, I depend on the bodily aspect of Catholicism. Without it, I would get too much in my head and wouldn't be able to feel God's presence. I think that's super important. I think that's a big problem that we have. It's side related note. Somebody was pointing that somebody said online today, said you don't have what was it? An anxiety disorder. You have a lack of purpose in your life. You need to have a family and have a purpose, and you won't have so much to be anxious about. And I think that even honestly, I think that we do get too much in our heads and not enough in our hands in America. And I think even our method of entertainment is sitting around watching other people do things on a box.
Isn't that sad?
One of the problems I have with professional sports as a cultural idiom is that we're paying other people to do the things that used to be folk activities, right? They used to be things that we would go do, and now we like to pay people to do it better than we can, and so then and it started off just being, we're going to watch the best of the best, and we'll give them a little money for it, and now it's like, well, we don't even need to go play sandlot baseball anymore. We're old. If we go play baseball, we're going to miss the big game.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk about Kylie Jenner for governor.
Kylie,
or what? What's his name?
So
I saw a meme that said like elect a tranny to own the libs. I'm gonna get in that band.
I'm too small channel. They don't even know I'm here.
Yeah. Well, it kind of operates. So like theonomy gets interesting in two ways for me. Like one, being reformed. I'm not seeing a meaningful difference. I'm not seeing like different types of non-Christians like living like meaningfully worse or better lives, like in the cosmic sense, in a salvific sense. So I'm not grading people's performance in their lives as non-Christians. You know what I mean? I'm not like separating good. There's the good non-Christians and the bad non-Christians. So I'm not. For instance, like I could easily vote for a Caitlyn Jenner for governor in that sense, and that's something that I think that it seems like more than 50% of Christian conservative Republican types have issue with, because they're grading people on some sort of scale where Christians are at the top of that scale, and it just kind of slides down from that.
I don't think that's entirely accurate.
Yeah.
I don't. I think you may be looking at 50% of professing evangelical Christians that have that, but more than half of those are Democrats, and I think they're the ones that are having the biggest problem with those sort of issues. And I think that they live in a state of cognitive. My personal feeling is they live in a state of cognitive dissonance against their own religious values, because
there's that legalism again,
they place that mandatory charity higher than free will. And I think that this is, once again, this comes back to something else we're talking about with the whole idea of the mythic, right? The mythic has the most power when people are taught to think reasonably, right? Everybody can experience the myth, and they can intuitively gain information and wisdom from it. And that's the beauty of the myth. But the people that are able to best expound the myth and to expand the myth are the people that can really dig down into it. The people, because it's like, I don't believe in entertainment, and I haven't for a long time, right? I don't think that people should seek to be entertained, and I don't think that creators should seek to entertain people. I think that that's a mistake, right? Not that it shouldn't be fun and engaging, but entertainment is just the first level of understanding in a thing, right? Like when I watched The Office, I didn't watch The Office to laugh at dumb people. I watched The Office and studied how are these interactions real? How does this reflect the experience I go through? And even the idea, right, that people have characters that they relate with is the beginnings of that step beyond just entertainment, right? Like Dumb and Dumber, like somebody watching Dumb and Dumber and laughing at the stupidity, that's entertainment. Right? Somebody watching, Dancing with the Stars, and maybe that's entertainment. But I think we live in a place where if we're creators, we shouldn't be seeking to entertain people. We should be seeking to engage people, right?
So you would vote for Caitlyn Jenner?
All right, so I've heard kind of like two rabbit trails here. So let me try to comment on both rabbit trails. Right, this is gonna be like like an RPG Let's Play where we explore every all 20 possible pathways. All right, so that's the Caitlyn Jenner thing, I see that as kind of close to I remember when Mitt Romney ran, there was this ongoing conversation where can you vote for a Mormon, and it was sort of what was funny about it was I had really strong opinions on why I wasn't. I had strong opinions on why I wasn't a Mormon. And it was sort of the first time I heard about that was the first time I ever heard oh, why wouldn't someone vote for a Mormon? Then I'd sit and think about it. Right. And I guess I ended up back up at when I'm evaluating who's running for office, I'm evaluating something very different than just what do they believe. Because I guess you could have said that Barack Obama was some kind of Generic Protestant, maybe in a Black liberation theology, or maybe secular nominal, I'll go to church because my constituents want me to go to church kind of sense, right? But I was never I was never tempted to vote for Barack Obama because he was more Protestant and not vote for Romney because he was more Mormon, because it was sort of I go into what are the policy mode, right? I want to almost pretend those two people don't exist and dumb it down to the policies they're fighting for. One thing I'm kind of divided mind about on Caitlyn Jenner is I do follow these weird graper types, right? Because I kind of want to get a feel for where they're coming from. And one of the recurring arguments they make is that the conservative movement doesn't conserve everything, and then a few years go past and then the conservatives just embrace whatever the liberals were advocating for 5 years ago. So I do get this feeling that Caitlyn Jenner running for office is kind of symbolic of us like gradually moving to the like more and more to the left, trying to catch up with the left. So that's one thing that kind of bothers me. I guess I'm kind of like, I'm happy I'm not in the position where I don't live in California or wherever that is. So I don't have to like make that decision. But I feel like I could vote for Caitlyn Jenner if I like matched up Caitlyn Jenner with his opponent. I'm definitely gonna get Matt canceled, right? But
I think I said Bruce a while ago. So
Bruce, there we go. Yeah,
you also said Kylie. You're just naming Jenners out of nowhere.
That's a different Jenner, isn't it?
It's a totally different Jenner.
I guess I don't like the trend. Like, I'm not looking forward to having to, like, maybe one day there's going to have to be like this gay trans Republican who's like super conservative on economics.
Yeah.
And right,
like Blair Wright is going to run for president.
You want to see me get banned here? Check this opinion out. The real scary thing is, what if Bruce decides to detransition during her term?
Oh gosh,
because that's a thing that happens pretty frequently. Like,
well, that was, I know he was exploring that. He was feeling like that was going to be something he was going to have to go back to, but I guess that's off the table now.
But I'm just saying that's a thing that makes a thing.
Well, the reason I bring it up, like, it's a fun hot topic, but also it's clearly well, I guess it, okay.
See,
yeah, well, it brings us to that question of what, when we're looking at Exodus and we're looking at the Mosaic Law, like you ask a Jew today, you ask an Orthodox rabbinic Jew, like they're going to say the law wasn't, this is my understanding, they're going to say the law isn't for humanity, the law is for Jews.
Yes.
and somehow the Christians, at some point, we've gotten this idea that the law is for humanity. So whether you're voluntarily ascribing to be a part of our identity group or not, you still have to abide by the laws that were given specifically just to God's people. And
there's a specific reason for that. Going back to the big O Orthodox churches, there's a very specific reason for that. It's a misreading of Romans, frankly. But the idea that the church is the new Israel, that Israel was left behind in 70 AD and God judged them, and now we're the church. I mean, we're Israel, and that was
we can get into that's another topic, because that's a misreading of Calvin.
It's not just Calvin. it goes all the way back. It goes all the way back to the 2nd century.
Yeah.
So
I think I actually wrote Andrew Klavan at some point, and I basically just asked the question, well, okay, do you think that a Jew needs to repent and believe in Christ as much as an atheist? And I think he basically just kind of I think his answer to that was basically, well, I'm not sure. Right. Yeah. Right. Like it was well, I don't know who saved me. Sorry.
That's cool. He talked about it on his. Oh, that's cool.
He's actually talked about that question several times, and kind of where he's come to is he thinks that God's grace is big enough that it's not Andrew Klavan's problem.
But here's the thing: there's a difference between saying I don't know who is and who isn't saved, and trying to talk about who needs to hear the gospel. Because from a gospel, perspective, like that would make the rubber meets the road should you actually tell your Jewish friend about Jesus Christ and what the gospel is? Because if they already have it because they're Jewish, then you don't need to tell them about who Jesus Christ and what the gospel is. And my attitude has been, I sometimes feel like our response to anti-Semitism is kind of making us it's like you can always respond to an evil by going too far in the opposite direction. So like the evil of Nazism forced us to grapple with the evil of anti-Semitism, but I almost think it's too far a step to say the church has been anti-Semitic, therefore the Bible is the New Testament is anti-Semitic, right? Like I feel like it shouldn't be anti-Semitic to say that Jews need Jesus and Jews should be introduced to Jesus.
Well, and I would
Yeah.
And I 100% agree with you on that one. And in fact, I think look back to the words of Paul, where Paul said, "I would just as soon go to hell if I could save my brethren. I would forsake. I would." That tells me pretty heavily that yes, we should be telling our Jewish friends about Jesus.
And he's speaking as a Jew, that's also a big,
because that's one thing people forget. Paul never stopped practicing Judaism, like right up until he was bundled by the Sanhedrin and brought in before I'm going to forget the dude's name, Festus or whatever it was, toward the end of the book of Acts. Yeah. I mean, he never stopped practicing Judaism. He was a Jew's Jew while he was writing the Christian scriptures. And I think that's something that we knew that is important on that. But yeah.
Can I tell you why Mike S. Miller thinks I'm anti-Semitic?
Sure. Why?
Sure. Sure.
It's because I told him that Israel was always in the sense that we mean ethnically diverse. It was always ethnically diverse.
That's true.
So this dichotomy that Israel was not ethnically diverse, and then the church is the first time that, in again, not in their sense, but in our sense of complexion and racial heritage, and in cultural diversity, like whatever our modern things we're trying to do with race today that we invented. In that sense, like there's this idea that like suddenly the church became the diverse one for the first, like God was like, now it's time for some diversity, like that, and he did that in 33 AD or something. That's a false reading of the text.
There was Hellenism, right?
That's
like
kind of true.
There were Hellenistic
It's also
Jews.
kind of not true, because like the Jewish people were ethnically diverse. That's the thing to think about. Like the Jewish people weren't, because they accepted foreigners, they accepted people that converted all their history. So they became part of one ethos in the first century Greek sense. They became part of a different ethos, but that they were different than what we call an ethnic group, because there were the Hellenists, like you said, Marm, but also the Ethiopian eunuch was coming up to celebrate Passover from Ethiopia. He was an African, a black African Jew who was in service to the royal family of Ethiopia, who was coming to Passover to celebrate Passover because he was Jewish.
Yeah. And I bring it up because this idea that the church is replacing, I'm sure there are people who unfortunately I have seen some people who do think of it in these terms. There's a lot of Roman Catholics. They got some explaining to do, because they kind of adopt this. Not everybody, but I've where I do see it, it's in kind of like an Italian Catholic kind of background where they are adopting some sort of replacement theology. But the Calvinist Protestant approach is not historically that. Right. It's just saying it was ethnically diverse. There were always people being grafted in to the root of Jesse. A lot of in Old Testament and New, and now there's just a lot more that have been grafted in. So maybe people are obscure; they can't see the Jewishness. They can't see the natural vine for all the grafted in vines. But that doesn't mean that like no one in Presbyterian circles that I frequent is saying that the church is replacing.
It's a growing trend in progressive churches.
Really?
Yes. And I am my guess on it. It's a way of matching the Democrat anti-Israel talking points, and also squaring the idea that because they're Israel, free Palestine and all that stuff. Yeah. And I think those ideas are very connected. And so they've latched onto this old idea of replacement theology as a way of explaining squaring their political position, instead of and I personally think, right, that Israel belongs in Israel. The land of the Jews should be where Jews can go. And
But
I
you
think
believe in one ethno-state. It just has to be Israel.
yeah, well, except it's not an ethno state because
It
Palestinians are
is.
already in the Senate. So, you know, to say Palestinians need self-rule, they have it. They have it. They're
But you
already
do have
part of the
this
assembly.
like Lebensraum view of like a people for a particular land.
Yeah, I think in that sense, first
An
of all,
ethnos for
most
a
of the
land.
old world already is that. You know,
Yeah.
This is one of those awkward moments where it's like since I'm studying the Divergent, right? This is one of their talking points, right? That historically a country was a race, right? Which is something like that just pops out at you as you read history. Like, oh yeah, every country, they have this strong idea of themselves as a people and as a race. The whole thing is they didn't have like a Darwinistic view of race. They had more like, oh yeah, these are my people. We hang out together in the same. We fight for each other,
Greek
right?
Same language.
Yeah. Yep. And I historically that's true. And then now we have, and this is what makes America. This is what makes America exceptional, is we are creedal, right? It's not we are e pluribus unum. We're many people. We become one people because we choose to be, because we agree with a certain set of principles, right, that are outlined in our founding documents. Which is why some of our representatives ought to just be rounded up and shipped off because they don't believe in our founding documents. You're not creedal. Go away. Go find a nation that fits you.
I was surprised when you said that on Twitter, and now you're saying it on YouTube, and I'm shocked and appalled. I don't know what to do. I don't know. I don't know about shipping people off.
Based on creed. All right.
I am 100% okay with exile.
Yeah.
I want to play devil's advocate, even if it gets me in trouble. Okay, so I like last week, like I'm listening to what's his name? What's that kid's name? What's the silly Zoomer kid? Nick Fuentes. That's his name. All right, like he's right, like he's the famous.
Oh, we're going everywhere, aren't we?
Oh, yeah, like he's been banned on YouTube, right? So he's
the replacement theology Roman Catholic guy I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, there we go. We go. All right. I didn't know that. Like, I knew that Nick Fuentes, like, did some nasty stuff, right? All right, we'll put it that way.
But you want to see, you want to tell, like, what are the groypers doing? Like,
right. Okay, so from that perspective, so like something like that he might bring up is if you like go back to the founders, they would have like a really strong consciousness of themselves as like the English race, right? This is something they'd specifically object to, right? Like a nation can't be an idea, because if it's just an idea,
that's not
then
true.
Right. So right, and I'm saying this from the perspective of disagreeing with this.
I can prove it wrong with 3 words. You want to hear them?
Okay, sure.
Martin Van Buren.
Okay. So go, delve into that, because I want to hear what.
So Martin Van Buren was, I think, our 5th president. He's the only president that we've had whose first language wasn't English, because he grew up speaking Dutch, because he was an old New Amsterdamer, right? His family came over with a Dutch settlement that was there before it was New York. They were still speaking Dutch during the time of the founding.
Oh, cool.
And he grew up in that Dutch society that it was part of America and was integrated into society of America, but was still speaking Dutch.
Oh, that's cool.
He believed in the things that America stood for. He was our president for, I think, 1 term was all, but he was not a WASP.
Well, and all that's just kind of silly when you live in my state, where it's actually you kind of need to be bilingual just to operate in daily society, just with your fellow Americans. It's not like an immigrant thing. It's people, it's a multi-generational thing. And everyone is bilingual pretty much. And I'm just catching up. So, and it's not Dutch.
Yeah. But that's what I'm saying is like New York State was 1 vote away from choosing German as an official language when they were first incorporated.
Yeah.
Because it was the middle ground between English and Dutch.
That's cool.
So it was
That's funny.
and America intentionally doesn't have an official language because we're a nation of ideas. We're not a nation of ethnicity.
Okay. So
Which
since I brought up the Grapers, I just want to clarify something. The reason I'm against the Grapers specifically is I think there's a strong Christian argument for it, where the gospel of Christ is for every tribe, tongue, and nation, and people of different races and ethnicities become brothers and sisters in Christ. The reason I listen to them is because I think that the kind of like divergent right or the Graper right are picking up on maybe like the racial identity that's baked into the new left. And they're just sort of like taking that logic and saying, well, okay, the new left says all of these racial categories are real. So we'll just assume all these racial categories are real. And then we'll just conclude with white superiority, right? They're taking it into a direction the left doesn't want to take it, but they are taking the left's premises seriously.
They're that mean that what white supremacists and woke lefters are really the same person, and that's the part of the thing that bothers me is like definitionally, if you start to parse out, and I've done this on the show a few times, if you start to parse out the ideas of that the left and the right were founded on when it was named, right? The
French
further right
Revolution,
you take it, the further you move it away from because like. Have I talked to you about that more?
Yeah, we talked about this. The left and right connotes the left as the radical French and the right as the more Catholic or Christian roots French. Yeah,
right. And it was and both of them were collectivist, right? But the people on the right believed, well, maybe you shouldn't just kill people and steal their stuff.
Yeah.
And the people on the left were like, no. We absolutely should kill people and steal their stuff because it's our stuff.
The revolution isn't over until the last king is strangled with the entrails of the last priest, like that kind of radical leftist view.
And I wouldn't even call it radical, frankly, because it's just collectivism. It's the same thing. It's just that they want to be the king instead of having someone else be the king. The new boss is the same as the old boss. There's no practical difference between monarchy and collective socialism. It's just it's just about who gets to pull the strings at the end of the day, Yeah.
So when you get back to that creed idea, though, is it enough for that creed idea to just kind of be like a generic idea of like, oh, there's a God who gives us rights? I think do we need like a specific? Do we need a specifically Christian God to make to have like this shared country or this shared ideal?
Well, I don't even think you have to. I think you have to have an axiomatic God, right? The idea that just like the Declaration of Independence states that we are endowed, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. That among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just authority from the consent of the governed. Right.
Okay.
And
now maybe we are on the same. Maybe we are on the same page. But the one thing I'm worried about is if people don't start out with that presuppositionally, then they don't care when you appeal to that. Right. Like if they don't, if they're an atheist, they don't care.
But the thing is when it comes down to it, right, is like the concept is the axiomatic God, right? The idea of the Declaration of Independence. Every other system of government always lends itself toward the government sticking its feet down on the neck of the people. Everyone. Right? If you can't assume that you and I are equal and that you don't get to steal my stuff, then we're living in a world where we can't get along. Right? So
so how far would you push that though in like the ANCAP direction though, right?
So here's the situation with anarcho-capitalism. Anarchy is impossible because people have to form governments. It's not that governments are good; it's that they're inevitable.
Right. Well, they'll form Genghis Khan bands eventually and start stealing.
Even not necessarily even they won't even. Anarchy doesn't just necessarily dissolve into chaos. Right? Those aren't the same thing. You look at the island of Tristan da Cunha, right? Which was a functional anarchy for like 200 years, right? Where there was no elected government, there was no taxes, there was no rules. But there was no rule, like governmental rule. But there were ad hoc governments that would crop up, and town meetings that would happen when people get out of line, and people would assign a neighbor to be a judge in a land dispute between two neighbors, and ad hoc governments would show up and then dissolve after the thing went away, and everything went on. And that happened until the volcano started erupting in the 60s, right? Oh, and then when they it's a crown property. And when the citizens were all hauled to England, and they're like, "Oh, technology is amazing. I think we'd like some of that." And within 5 years, the anarchy had been disestablished, and they had a city council, a standing city council. But you can't buy land there. So I mean, it's still pretty minarchist out there, but it is formalized. But you can't buy land there because it's an island. It's only inherited through birthright.
There's your ethno state.
pretty much. They're a multi-ethnic ethno state though, because they've had the occasional sailor that's married into the family and brought in a new set of genes. And anyway, different stories. But yeah, no, the thing is that government's inevitable. So the idea that we're going to have an anarchic capitalist system, well, you're not. You're going to have smaller informal governments that perform exactly the same functions, and eventually you're going to hire somebody to do security because it's too much trouble, and then you're going to have a police force because that's what's going to happen.
I forgot to mention this when we started, but I've just been listening to a great courses on the Renaissance and the Borgia popes, so I was expecting this to get spicy, but one of the things is the Florentine Republic, they were very chill, very free, right? Like a proto, you can almost see a real strong connection between them and America, where they had this real strong emphasis on liberty. And then the King of France comes and he just railroads them. And they have absolutely no way of competing with his superior technology, right? Like principles of freedom, absent from an ability to defend yourself from a bigger bully, are nice, but they don't deal with kind of the harsh reality of a world where warlords will kick down your door and take all your stuff and do a lot worse. That's kind of my dumb reason for why I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. Is I feel like they haven't thought through what happens when someone or maybe they'll say something like, "Oh, well, people will have guns and they'll defend themselves and they'll hire private armies," but I don't feel like they've thought through what happens when a tyrant comes to take over your stuff. How did the libertarians deal with that problem?
Yeah, and that's one of the things. Fallout, the video game Fallout 4. I don't know if you guys play it. It's one of my favorites. But the Fallout universe is basically an anarcho-capitalist paradise, right? Where independent, involuntary cooperative entities form limited governments that oversee the defense of others. It's fantasy. You're right. Eventually, somebody comes along with a technological advantage, and that's just the end of it. So, that's one of the reasons I can't go into anarcho-capitalism. But I do also realize that there is a difference between, and I think this is something that we modern world we don't do, understand the difference between the ideal and the practical, right? The ideal should always be pursued, even if we have to try to look at it incrementally or understand that we'll never actually get there. Right?
Yeah, sure.
So from a biblical perspective, what is the ideal state of man? Right?
Well, okay, so I have some thoughts about this. So
yeah, so
God did institute a monarchy, and he blessed that, and you weren't supposed to kill the king of Israel because they were anointed by God. But what did he? But before that, he warned Israel, a king's going to tax you and send your sons to war. God seemed to like the judges system better personally.
Yeah, well, and in the judges system, what was that? Right? What it was a tribal republic. They had there was a set aside leaders of tens and of hundreds and of thousands, and then that was the beginnings of the Sanhedrin. Was this body, this republican body that was set up there, and then there wasn't. And here's the crazy thing about it: there was a judicial branch, there was a legislative branch, there was not an executive branch in the original republic. God was to be the executive branch, and God judged them with other nations. And even taxing, the tax structure, there wasn't an enforcement for it. It was a 20% tax on your increase, 10% to run the business of the judges, and 10% and charity, and 10% to run the priestly class. But there was not a collection mechanism.
There also wasn't a prison system.
Yeah,
which is interesting.
But there was exile. Once again, I have big problems with the way we do prisons. I have big problems with the way we do prisons. I'm 100% in favor of exile.
Yeah.
And not just because of that. I think that there's nothing crueler than locking somebody in a box and telling them they can't leave. That's utterly dehumanizing.
This is interesting because I've been listening to like a Christian channel called Apologia, where they take like a really hard anti-prison stance biblically. And what's kind of interesting is it's sort of like they're arriving at the same destination as like hard leftist anti-prison advocates, but for very different reasons. Like the Marxist anti-prison advocates say like the prison system is racist, the prison system is capitalist, and they arrive at therefore we need to abolish the prison system. And some Christians seem to arrive at that conclusion because they say, well, like the Bible doesn't actually lay out anything like a prison system. The Romans used a prison system, but the biblical system seems to be something more like, if you break my stuff, you pay for it. There's a strong emphasis on the death penalty in Old Testament law for certain crimes. There's a part of me that almost says, that almost kind of like simplifies it. Like if I rob your store, I pay you money to pay for hurting you by robbing your store. If I murder someone, I die. Like that seems a lot cleaner than just like this 30 years of mistrials and continual what do you call it? Appeals process where like someone's sitting on death row for 40 years, right?
And the other thing about that is that the death penalty was was done by the community and headed up by the family of the victim, which left lots of room for mercy on behalf of people, right? So and because the person in the family who was in charge to do that was the Avenger of Blood, and it was their determination on exactly how, stoning, but they had to hunt them down. And they had the cities of refuge were put in there, and then they had allowed to appeal to judges and all. There was a system in there that was designed to engage people in their own governance. But once again, I want to take that back a little bit farther too, because that was an established government that was for the tribal republic of ancient Israel. We are not part of the tribal republic of ancient Israel. We are a different people in a different place in history under a different set of restrictions. So what is universal, right? What is the universal station of man? What are the original frameworks that God set up for us according to a literal reading of Genesis? Which even if it's a mythic situation, let's go ahead and assume it for the sake of this discussion.
Well, I'm a dirty young Earth creationist, so I'll take the literal position. So we have the fall of man basically spoiling what is good in the garden, right? Mm-hmm. So man has to work for his living. Woman has to have terrible pain in childbirth. We have murder basically right off the bat. And I guess you have the creation mandate of go forth and multiply. So we have a positive dimension where we're supposed to go forth and multiply, but we have this negative dimension where human sin basically guarantees that in our nature we're going to be murdering and hurting each other all along the way.
Right, but go back one chapter. God established a world, right? Where consequence was real and choice mattered.
Okay.
Right. Freedom is the single most important thing in that equation. Right.
So can we pin you down as an Arminian, Rhys?
No, it
has to be freedom.
I actually disagree with the dichotomy. I don't think those two things are separated.
All right.
I think predestination and free will are not mutually exclusive. I think they're both necessary.
Well, that's what the Reformed people are saying. So
actually,
that's not what Arminians are saying.
So what's interesting about this is I feel like when a guy like Arminius shows up, it sort of forces, like anytime a heretic shows up, it forces the Orthodox to try to like spell out what they believe. Whereas before that, they could kind of just like not worry about it too much. Like before an Arminian shows up, then it's sort of like you don't have a problem talking about, like Calvin didn't have a problem talking about free will and talking about God's predestination. It was sort of like when there's a threat to predestination that you start having to like think through the implications of free will. And I almost wonder if maybe there's too much of a tendency of people to want to, like, we want to have all the philosophical answers, so we want to nail down every detail of it. At the same time, I do feel like if we ever reach a point where we do understand what each other are saying, and it's a yes no. Like, I actually like it if people can sort of think through what they're saying and say yes or no to it. Like, I don't like the solution of saying, oh, well, there's no disagreement here. Can't we all just get along? Like, let's just rephrase the confession of faith slightly so it's worded in a way so we all feel okay. We all feel okay about it. But I actually would agree that I don't like I don't like Dortian Calvinists who emphasize predestination to the point where they say, yeah, man's basically a robot, right? Like part of the I am a Calvinist, but one of the reasons I'm a Calvinist is I don't think the implications of Calvinism are that we're a robot. I think we do have agency and choice.
I think that the reason there appears to be a dichotomy between those ideas is because we're bound by time, right?
Okay,
but God is not bound by time. God is timeless, and so God's like pre-knowledge, foreknowledge, his predestination is happening simultaneously, right? At least as far as we can figure out.
The dirty Molinist.
So no, it's not the same. It's not the same.
It's not Molinism.
I don't believe so.
So Molinism, I thought Molinism was the idea that God has to act in light of what options exist for him, right? So he enters into kind of like this. Yeah. He has to enter into kind of like this middle space where, okay, in light of how humans will act, I will therefore predetermine events in light of these choices and consequences, right? So like William Lane Craig's like famous for this stuff. Like, so it's like if he has a million decisions, he has to pick the decision that is like the best decision, but he can't change how you'll act, or he's stuck with basically what decisions can logically exist, essentially.
And I don't believe that God's like dominion is limited, right? I think it might appear like that to us because we're so limited. But he's on a whole different level. It's not like God has to pick between two options. God chooses one thing because that's the thing that is. But it's his choice, and our choices are they're intrinsically connected and yet independent.
I think that's fair, because when we're getting into how does God predetermine events, we are ultimately getting into the mind of God, and we're kind of getting into questions where there are Bible passages that talk about predestination, but there aren't Bible passages that are laying out our questions for us in exactly the way that we'd like them to have these debates, right? So, and it's like Calvin had the great line, like where the Bible falls silent, I fall silent. I almost feel like we need a little dose of that, especially in nerdy Christianity.
Well, and I think if I'm to compare to the nature of this struggle, right, to anything specifically from Scripture, I'd have to go to Job, right? Like Job's like sits and he gets to the end of his book, and he's at the end of his wits, and his friends are bad mouthing him the whole time, and he's like, I will demand an answer of the Almighty, and the Almighty says, you can't handle an answer. What do you think you are? I'm coming here to answer you, but you can't handle it. Can you tell me?
You didn't shape the world, yeah.
You didn't shape the world. You didn't put the sky in place. You didn't cause the sun to fall, the rain to fall and the sun to shine. You can't even begin to understand what I'm talking about. And Job says, you're right. Hey, yeah, I get it. I get it. I can't get it. And I think there's a lot of things in life and a lot of things in doctrine that we can come up to. This is kind of what's talking about with the discussion about the virginity of Mary, right? It's not salvific, and we can't understand it anyway, right? I think we can come close, and I think there's lots of things we can come really close to, and I think that perhaps the Protestants and the Catholics are just as wrong about just as many things, but they're just different things.
Don't do that postmodern thing.
It's not postmodern. It's that real truth exists, but real truth is the completeness of real truth is beyond our understanding.
I'm comfortable saying that, so one of the classic problems is you want to balance humility and like a recognition of your own limitations as a human being with a commitment to objective truth, and God's truth has to exist outside of me, right? So
exactly.
In my disagreements with them, I want to balance a recognition that I could be wrong with a conviction that, well, there has to be a truth, and I don't want to pretend like if I have a friendship with a Catholic or an Orthodox, I don't want the friendship to be based on a misunderstanding of what each other believe. Like, to me, it's almost it's almost more refreshing to read like a dyed-in-the-wool, like hard-nosed Catholic, just like mad at the Protestants, was like, well, at least you're consistent. I respect that, right? Maybe like there's this irony where the very Orthodox, we understand that we disagree with each other ferociously, but at least we can agree we disagree. Whereas it's kind of like the liberal Protestants and the liberal Catholics trying to get along and have an ecumenical movement, but it's sort of like neither of them are. I think they're making a sense of unity that's not necessarily based on them agreeing on truth. It's them I get basically singing Kumbaya. That's one of my concerns. That's why I'm cynical of an ecumenical movement. Is the ecumenical movement seems to come from people who don't take their doctrine seriously on either side. I think there would have to be some kind of like significant movement from God for a serious ecumenical movement to take place, because it would basically mean like some kind of like church council or series of debates where we actually like get down to brass tacks about what the key doctrines are that would allow us to be in communion with one another. Like, one of the reasons I follow Pope Francis is I feel like Pope Francis is coming close to making a crisis for Catholics, right? Like I have to laugh at how my conservative Catholic friends just like, oh gosh, what's Pope Francis up to today? But like we're one church council or papal like ex cathedra statement from getting to witness like a significant like conversation on Catholic's part. Yeah, like we're close to seeing another schism.
They all become Protestants. Yep.
Well, but that's the thing is they wouldn't become Protestant though. They would probably just become like there'd be like a hyper conservative Catholic movement and a liberal Catholic movement.
There already was, like, not in our lifetimes, but just before, there was a schism that happened in Vatican II. And there's a whole branch of, there's actually several branches of the Roman Catholic Church that split off as pre-Vatican II.
I mean, isn't that what we are though? You know, like we're just hyper conservative Catholics.
I think there's enough. I actually
we just bucked the innovations of.
I think there's enough difference between, in terms of the nature of what redemption is, difference between a lot of the Protestants to separate it from Catholic. Although I do think that in the old term, the classic term, that kind of there's one universal church. I do think that that's true, but I think that's true because the body of Christ can't be divided. But that doesn't necessarily mean we're going to agree. I mean, like, for example, my body is constantly attacking itself. And so I think I have a fairly decent understanding of the way the church operates, written on my own flesh. Not how it should, but how it does. And because we're corrupt, and our flesh is yet to be redeemed. And my flesh doesn't work right at all. So, But I think that this is one thing that Star says everyone did what was right in their own eyes from the book of Judges, talking about both the. I think it's a double-pointed statement in Judges, that it was the nature of the government that allowed for that. It also was the corruption of the people that sought their will instead of the will of God. And I think that's a double statement from Judges. But I think it also relates to the nature of doctrinal discussion, where I think one of the problems is that we want to be right in our own eyes, and this comes to the humility of I might be wrong, right? That I think we have to understand that do we think we're right because we sussed it out, or do we think we're right because it's true? Or is it enough not an issue that we can let it slide? Like, for example, I've talked to you, Matt. I don't believe in Catholic transubstantiation. I don't believe that the Eucharist becomes the body and blood of Christ. But I do believe that it's part of the same Seder that Christ oversaw that was never finished. And I think that the elements are that spiritual meal, and that the food that nourished the disciples nourishes us. And so we are one body with Christ through that, not because we're partaking of his literal flesh, but because we're partaking of the same meal. And that's a weird position that I have, that I've read a few. I actually have run across a couple of Messianic Jews that have the same reading of it as I, which was kind of interesting to run across. But that's not a widespread. Most people don't think it. I would hope nobody would break fellowship with me over something that weird, or wild, or mystic. But
I wasn't Lutheran, but I went to a Lutheran school. And when I asked them, do you believe in consubstantiation? They said, no, we wouldn't describe it that way. We believe that Christ is under the bread, right? I know they use the word under to describe their view. And I was listening. I was trying my hardest to understand what they were saying. It was just sort of like that bounced off me, and I don't get it.
No, I actually can almost understand that, in the way that the substance of Christ, his godhood, undergirds creation in a special way, in our fellowship with that. I don't think that that's the reading from that. I don't think it's in line with the Old Testament in a way that I think that Christ being the fulfillment of the covenant would need to be, which is also why I don't think that the transubstantiation is biblical either. Although the Catholics and Orthodox I've talked over it with are just like, well, the descriptions are all visceral words in Greek. They literally mean this thing, and I was like, well, of course they do. If it's any kind of metaphor or myth, it would have to, or it would be meaningless. You can't say it's kind of, sort of, and get the point. So I mean, that's the nature of language.
I just noticed you have Kyrie set up behind your head. That's such a nice touch. Very cool.
I have actually for a couple of weeks. I also have Ghostopolis and Cardboard.
Oh,
cool.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
I love Cardboard.
Cardboard's
that was my
amazing.
first book by Doug TenNapel that I ever read. I had no clue. I'd never played Earthworm Jim once, and Cardboard was the first thing I ever saw by Doug TenNapel, and I really dug it.
Cardboard broke my heart.
Yeah,
it's such a touching story about loss and about meaning and about purpose and redemption. It's just hits here.
The first thing I ever read was Bigfoot Bill. I didn't know he was just a weirdo who would show up on Jason Brubaker's podcast every once in a while, and he'd always turn things back to Chesterton.
Yeah,
I was really annoyed with him. And then I bought his book, and I realized he was probably the best writer Comicsgate had.
Yeah, and it's sort of like there's a trickle down effect, right? Like if you're reading Chesterton, you're soaking yourself in this kind of mythic English tradition of wordsmithing, right? Like I've always felt like a lot of the great art like, oh, this is like this famous dichotomy. Once upon a time, all of the great artists were making Christian art, and now all the famous artists are making decadent art. What happened to us, right? So maybe like outside of that narrative is also kind of like this interesting point that for a lot of history, Christians were the patrons of art, and B, for a lot of history, like any artist could read the Bible and just find like I always come back to this on my channel, but the Bible is a really violent and really cool book, right? But like it's not a VeggieTales book. It's a kick butt, awesome, mythic, crazy history, human drama book. So it jumps out at you while reading it. So of course I think there's this strong connection where artists resonate with that and want to pull that out of it. So it doesn't surprise me that Doug is able to connect those things, right? Because it's there, right? Like if you want to speak to people about what's true. I think Andrew Clavin has made the quip that every artist take what they experience in their time in life and they combine it with what's universally true, right? So we resonate with like the themes of older literature, but we're also getting like a feel for, oh, that's what it was like to be alive in 1800. Oh, that's what it was like to be alive in the 1950s. You know, the artists are sending us some kind of message about how I felt being alive at this time that dies with history. Like we have all these historical records of 1950s. I don't know what it was like to be alive in the 1950s, but I can get a feel for it from the art.
I think
this has been like this is like 3 different series of stream of consciousness rabbit trails on the Mattriarchy today.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite shows now. This is really cool. We kind of ran.
This is a really good show. I mean, nothing against last week's show because I know that like I thought
I was just going to tell a bunch of stories about popes committing assassinations and stuff.
So here's the thing from last week's show. Larry had such a great time. Larry Bernard had such a great time. He's like, "This is one of the best shows," and I was like, "I don't know if I could say that." I said, "We've had a lot of really, really good ones." I said, "This has been really good," and I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I just it's hard to compare that. This has been a lot of fun. And this comes back, Matt, you're talking about, or I guess Marm was talking about, this is like 3 different conversations, but this comes back to one of my prime philosophies, right? One of my prime, maybe it's a theory, I don't know what you call it, but I think that there's really only one thing, that the universe is one machine. And so every realm of ideas are connected. Art and music and drama and mathematics and philosophy, they're all part of one universe. And so the things you can learn in all of these things are relatable one to another. And I think that I think that the universe is just there's a what's it called
part of a unified whole, I guess. Yeah. And it's all sensible to us, which is very curious.
Yeah, and that's
interpretable by human minds.
So that's one of the big things that, like, the idea of special creation, the idea that there is a God behind everything. There are 2 big elements in my like pins on that. One is that we can understand the world, right? And the second is that anything at all exists. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's I've never seen anybody come up with anything close to a rational argument that doesn't just hand waving that question away. that doesn't postulate the existence of a divine being.
Well, one of the reasons I was poking in different places at different politics, I guess, in Christianity is because in my limited experience, protecting people's intellectual freedom is the best way that it makes it a safe place for everyone to kind of discuss these things more openly and as peers and as equals, regardless of where they're coming from, which is the first step towards people changing their minds freely. You know, if they first feel that it's safe to express their own particular disagreements, you know, and there's a culture that is encouraging people to listen, to understand, and not just to respond or troll each other. Yeah, the more we can do that, the more I think. Which is why I'm not a theonomist. The more people kind of freely, and I can even say this as a Reformed person, you know, freely, you know, become known by God.
Yeah. Well, and I think part of the thing is I think that for me the theonomist point misses an understanding. It's an intelligence. An information science point that they miss, right? If God is truth, the origin of all truth, then any philosophical or legal perspective that rings true is going to ring true with God, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think
we're allowed to have reason. We're allowed to apply our reason in situations where the Bible may not give us like the Bible gives us principles, but the Bible may not give us like a very explicit case law in every situation.
And not only are we allowed to have reason, we are encouraged to have reason, right? In the Psalms, right? Come, let us reason together. We're told the whole. I mean, and then there's the what are those? There's a whole class of Psalms where David cries out, I demand answers, and comes around to saying, well, God, you're good, and I have to accept that that's good enough, right?
But at the same time, human capacity for reason gets corrupted by sin. Like I think a logic is a consequence of the fall of man.
Yeah, absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. And so that's one of those things where I think we have to have where we have to allow reason, but I think it comes down to if we're going to build a world that is just, the closest we're going to come is understanding that the purpose of all of this is to preserve freedom. And in preserving freedom primarily, then we have the place to allow free will to do each other right. Right. And that's once again, that comes back to, why, I can't be I can't be a lefty, because that doesn't allow the most freedom.
Yeah. It can't be compelled. It
can't be compelled. It can't be compelled, because there's no virtue in compulsion. So when the government comes and sticks a gun in my face and takes my money to go give to other poor people, because I'm just barely not poor anymore. That just recently happened. But when the government comes and sticks the gun in my face to give to other poor people, then when it comes to that, it's like, well, that's not a virtue for me to give it to them. There's no glory in that. There's no virtue in that. I just don't get killed that day. But when I suffer to do good to others, when I work and my labor becomes somebody else's benefit, that's virtue, and that's praiseworthy. And that's my take on all that. So, and that comes back to, once again, what is the nature of God? What is the shape of the world that he has, that he built? And that was a world that he allowed the possibility for one man to damn mankind, rather than make a bunch of robots just to tell him how great he was, or to not make us at all.
Nice.
See, now you're getting back on your Arminianism, but that's fine.
It's not Arminianism. I'm telling you.
So Matt C, as
our perspective versus God's perspective.
I was hoping at some point we were going to talk about infant baptism, but I guess.
Oh yeah.
Maybe that's.
Did someone say baptism debate?
I almost called in to James White or what's his Brown, that guy. Every time my wife goes out of town, I call a famous YouTube theologian and try to. Yeah, in their calling show.
Press F in the chat. All right, so Matt C, I was actually like to totally derail the conversation and naturally segue to a completely related topic of conversation. So you've told us your testimony of like trying to get the girl and going to the Bible study. So how did you acquire your nerdy knowledge of Christian and Islamic sources? Like, was that unrelated to your Christian journey, or did you just like super get into that as in the process of becoming a Christian?
That's a really good question. Well, that only happened like 4 or 5 years ago, honestly.
Okay.
So I don't know what it was. I think there's a tension, I think, from our perspective. I'll just say from my perspective, I guess, in America, of like the first century Middle East. we seem to have, we understand that particular century here in America, or we think we do. We have a popular, like imaginary understanding of what that world looks like, and yet somehow, so we're talking about like, sorry, cat. The gospel comes to the Middle East, and it's defined in like a Near Eastern kind of framework first, and yet somehow Islam is the most foreign element to a Christian understanding of the world or a framework. So like how that's the popular dichotomy, I guess. Like the Muslims are the other, and yet they don't think of themselves as the other to Christianity. They think of themselves as a reform movement. They think of themselves as the Protestants.
As a hyper monotheism, yeah.
They just, that things got, that the church got corrupted. And so we're bringing it back to what, Jesus was actually a Muslim, and we're just kind of reforming things to get back to the original way things were. And a lot of their arguments are actually really interesting and compelling against praying to saints, for instance. Like there's a lot of healthy debate and dialogue on many sides about, whether or not intercession from saints or angels or Mariology was important, critical, or indeed heretical, and needs to be reformed out of Christianity. And that's what Islam is really a result of. So it's really interesting that like the more quote like foreign they appear to be, actually the more the more we can recognize ourselves in the sort of debates they're having. And then also
a human element sneaks back in. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just really respect, I love that they're coming from cultures generally that really encourage and respect debate. Like you don't have to be Muslim, but like you could be Middle Eastern and you probably enjoy arguing with people. And I really appreciate that. Like it's argued, like the whole Quran is just it's a system of arguments. So like they're thinking in terms of like, if you care about something, if it's true, it's worth arguing about. And they don't respect people who don't, who like most Western Christians today, who don't feel that, the more you care about something, the less you should argue about it or debate it.
I have never understood.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Like that whole conversation, like, don't talk about politics at the dinner table. And I was like, religion and politics, those off subject conversations. It's like the only things worth talking about are religion and politics. I don't understand why you would say don't talk. It's like don't have any meaning in your life, don't have any purpose. Just go ahead and it's that entertainment versus myth argument again, right? Let's talk about football, not about human excellence. Let's talk about football. Let's talk about the Avengers movies, not about heroism, not about the hero's journey, not about the heroism of the mundane, not about what it means to be a human. No. Let's just talk about actors, not about the nature of representation, not about the concept of human potential. Let's talk about let's talk about the celebrity gossip, not about who's going to govern us, not about what the proper position of the individual in society is. Well, let's just have meaningless, substanceless entertainment. Let's not have myth.
That was something about Comicsgate I didn't like. Was there was this element of like, oh yeah, no politics, just entertainment, and I thought, no, my argument wasn't no politics. My argument was no propaganda, and there's a difference. Like I think there's a like it didn't take long for Gamergate and Comicsgate as popular movements to become just sort of purely about, I don't know. It was they became like meta about the internet movement very, very quickly, and yeah, to the point that if you like sympathized with what they were trying to do or some of the things they were saying, it was sort of like there was no room anymore for any kind of like complexity or anything outside. Like there's a difference between making books for normies and kind of like a tyranny of the normies, like Marx's dictatorship of the proletariat. There's a difference between me making a book for normies and me feeling like I have to make everything cater to normie sensibilities, and I don't want to cater everything to normie sensibilities. I have things I want to say. Thank you very much.
Well, and it's like that comes down to the the whole the whole shape of that. Like in 2018, right? And I hugely believe that the whole the conversation became, the talking point became in late 2018, July, August, September, that Comicsgate is supposed to be apolitical, right? And before February of 19, like I really believed this was just something that like people needed to grow up in their understanding about. I talked to people. I said, no, you guys don't understand what politics is. You can't get away from politics. It's inevitable, and you need to just reframe it. And if you're going to argue with people saying comics weren't political, they will prove you wrong, because comics have always been political, because everything is political. It's just you're using the wrong definition. You mean partisan. You mean propaganda. Yeah. You don't mean political. So change your vocabulary, raise your intelligence level, and stop sounding like a moron. Right?
Well, and maybe like related to that, maybe there's a problem where if you're starting with entertainment and then you say, wait a second, the political conversation is entering into my entertainment, you're not entering into it because you were interested in the political conversation or the culture war. You're entering into it because you see it affecting like Star Wars or your video games, right? Like there was this Gamergate joke where, well, I just wanted to play video games and now I'm exposing like a global pedophile file ring, right? But the joke is that like these were just like dumb kids who were playing video games, and suddenly they woke up and said, wait a second, there's a political world out there, right? And I feel like the internet has kind of like made it possible for you to get famous and make a career talking, even if you haven't done much reading. And that's the dilemma, is like, right? Like you could be the smartest person in the world and just be a boring hack and nobody wants to listen to you. Or you could be like a really engaging and entertaining person who just doesn't know what you're talking about.
And see,
right?
And here's part of the thing is like, I don't necessarily, and this is going to sound weird, I don't necessarily think that reading alone is the thing. Right? It's about engaging with ideas, and you can engage with those ideas through a console. You can engage with those ideas through a video. You can engage with those ideas through conversation, right? But the trick is you have to be able to have the wherewithal to really pound through the ideas. And nobody in public school is taught to think.
I call it paying attention, because like high IQ, like reading comprehension, that's a rarefied, that's a special trait. But paying attention, anyone can pay attention. And I think like the mark of a good teacher is it is possible to explain complex ideas in simple language. I think that's like the mark of the greatest teachers, is that they're able to do this. And I think that everyday people can have conversations about the big and important topics. They might be able to have a more, they can have a more clear-headed conversation about it than any big head. And I think that paying attention means like listen to what you're saying, think about what you're saying, and don't forget what you say. Like if you say something, one of my favorite, favorites is like moral subjectivity, right? So if you say, well, I'm a moral subjectivist, okay, don't forget that, right? Because what a lot of moral subjectivists will do is they'll say, oh, yeah, all morality is subjective. But then a little later down the conversation, they'll circle back to making moral objectivist arguments, right? Like they forgot what they said a few minutes ago.
Because
right?
everybody is a moral objectivist.
Yeah.
It's just about whether it applies to them or not. But no, I'll tell you right now, Marm, if I was to clip my show, that last little speech of yours would be my clip. That was great.
All right, do it. See, here's the thing.
No.
You own this stream, right? So that means you also own the clips of the stream. Okay.
That was perfect. That was perfect, man. Yeah. That was great.
The right geek is in the chat, and actually this reminded me of something I was thinking about starting with. I read Chesterton's like little book on Thomas Aquinas, and at some point Chesterton gives his summation of the Protestant Reformation. And what's interesting about it is he's like on purpose trying to say to Catholics, we have to be fair to Protestants or we're not going to understand it, right? So what's interesting about it is it was sort of Chesterton trying his darndest to see the point the Protestants were trying to make. And I think his way of saying it was he called it the revenge of the Augustinians on the like Catholic followers of Thomas Aquinas. And he had some like poetic Chestertonian way of putting it that I'm going to mangle. But he said something like the Protestants were making this desperate plaintive cry for Christ. And something about that really struck me as interesting. Like, because I almost found it beautiful. At the same time, I understood Chesterton meant it as a criticism, right? As he is a Catholic and is a ferocious critic of Protestantism, is trying to understand it. He sees it as like sort of as a group of Christians trying to get back desperately, almost with like this like desperate need to Christ. That's something that really struck me about it. So I don't know. I'd recommend. Here's the thing, right? So when I tried to read Chesterton, he's like making 80,000 references to different Christian movements and heresies throughout history. So he's clearly assuming like an educated British audience, like what he thinks is a lay audience by our standards would be like someone who's actually read church history enough to interpret what the heck he's talking about, right? But I think one of the things that resonated about it for me was I recently like had a conversation with like a pagan coworker, like, you know, very new agey, like spiritual stones, and very little info on the Bible at all. And it kind of like that conversation forced me to try to get back to basics, because I'd always want to bring in like the nerdy, you know, terminology or the like advanced biblical concepts. No, I just got to like get this like really down to like, who is Jesus? What kinds of things did he say? What are, you know, things that he taught? So maybe kind of like as a neat wraparound, like as we're having, I feel like the Orthodox, Catholic, and Protestant conversations are conversations between people who really care about their faith and this history and a lot of these implications. And as we're finding ourselves in a pagan world, maybe something that the Protestants do have that I think is correct is because we have a very back to the Bible attitude. I think that's going to be very useful in trying to talk to the pagans who are just completely outside of this history and this conversation. Oh, and I see Matt C is posting about the moon god theory stuff. So that would be like Acts 17 apologetics, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think
does he go there? Because that's pretty.
I think I don't think he has specifically. Some other people have, but the other thing you got to look at with that whole thing is you also have that Zeus had two names, and one of them was Theus. So, yeah,
it comes from ha theos, just translated into Aramaic, and then from Aramaic to Arabic. It is what they say it is. It's not. They didn't baptize.
No. I'm just saying, like it's like the word Zeus and Theos. It exists before it was probably before the Greek language was formalized. Yeah,
I see. Yeah.
And so when Zeus became personal and Theos became impersonal, sort of, kind of, but more so. And so So the idea of a god was attached to that, but I mean it comes from Proto-Greek kind of stuff. They have those ideas that jumped through that. So, but yeah, I mean that's the language is like that, you know. I mean, we got to realize that like the Islam uses Allah as a personal name, but God is not a personal name. it's a concept. it's an existential name. Like the whole idea of naming is different. I mean, that's one thing we neglect, because God is a different kind of being. Like the descriptive of what he is not like we use a name, you know. So, but we use it that way because he's the only one. I mean, and the Judeo-Christian concept, he's the only one he's the only being of his type.
Yeah.
At some point, I had like I forgot his name. I had some atheist on my channel to talk about his comic, and he floated the idea of, well, the Jews were really polytheist, which was actually the first time I'd heard that live on the air.
Well, some of them were. That's why they went to Babylon.
Well, yeah, right. Like the Jews who were getting damned to hell were the polytheists. Yeah, they were like dying and getting like the earth was opening up and swallowing up the Jewish polytheists, right? But the kind of like the point is that I don't know, related to you, kind of like thinking of Zeus as theos. I don't know, maybe my connection there was how much of the Jews' encounter with foreign religions was the Jews saying, "Oh yeah, we believe all of these are like gods who are equally competitive with our God. We just like our God best," or how much of it is, Jews seeing these alternate gods as just statues who the true God hilariously like props up and then knocks over, right? Like Isaiah, right?
I mean, like if
the trial of the fake gods.
You look at scripture, both things are true. It's just different people at different times have different understandings of that, right? So you look at like Gideon, clearly believed they were just statues because he said so, but his father did not. So when Gideon smashed all of his father's idols, he got really mad.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, both of those things, I mean, were true for different people at different times. And you had priests I can't remember which one of the prophets was castigating the priestly class for having private idols in their hidden places in the temple. In their private lockers, they were keeping idols because they believed they were supposed to be serving the one God, but they were holding on to these superstitions, right? And Josiah, one of the things he did was clean out the hiding places in the temple when he came in, because people had forgotten about the law and he rediscovered. I mean, so those things are true. I mean, like that, you know, were there Jewish polytheists? Yes. Were there supposed to be? No.
Hear, O Israel, there is only one God.
Yes.
Get the basics right. Back to basics. There we go. I think we need like a back to basics. It never hurts to go back to basics. It never hurts to go back to like the simple or what we might consider the most basic or the most elementary aspects of the faith might actually be the most important for talking to non-believers, and maybe the most important to talking with divergent Christian thought, because a lot of the advanced debates are us talking about the implications of the more, I think, like the more basic, down to earth things.
Yeah, well, and I think that's one of the things. I think that like it's one of those things that they're both are true, right? It's like the question about why is there something instead of nothing, right? On a question that seems like just like, that's a stupid trolley question, but when you really start to fathom it, you're like, wait a second. It's way harder to make stuff. Why is everything here?
Albert Mohler, I think, had the quip once that children seem to be programmed by their very nature to believe that there is a creator for complex things. They see a building, they assume a person made it. They see a world, they assume a person made it. Yeah.
Yep. And everybody feels that way until you get to a universe, and then people start deciding that there can't be a creator.
Yeah.
So, but anytime you see
fedoras are the weird ones in history.
So, but yeah, that's a whole thing, guys. It's 9:30 here. It's much later. Well, and it's later there and later yet there. So
yeah.
Post tenebris lux. Quick, type 95 Theses in the chat.
Oh, hey,
it's about to be Lux here. It's so late. Can you bring me on again sometime when we can talk about polytheism in the Old Testament? Because that's my fun. That's my pet topic.
One thing nice. I did want to share something that I happened across. I just happened across here earlier. So let me look a thing up that I was looking for. I was going to put a picture up, but I couldn't find one that I liked offline that I felt fine with stealing.
End with a meme.
It was not a meme per se, but it kind of looks like a meme.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah. There actually
Marmaduke, didn't we talked with this guy, didn't we?
Hold on a second. I'm
like a year ago. Yeah, Paul Cox.
Oh yeah. He was on Ref Tunes. I had you and him on for a little talk. Yeah, I think I've got his book somewhere. He's got a children's book adaptation of Pilgrim's Progress. Yeah, real hardworking guy.
Cool.
I kind of want there to be a cartoonist alternative to Jack Chick. So Paul Cox is one of the guys I'm looking at as like an example of what I'm looking for.
That's kind of cool. And actually, I have a very mixed respect for Jack Chick. But at the same time, I saw this thing and I was like, I'm going to grab this as a deal for my as a thing for since we're going to be talking about Protestantism, I'll use this as my thumbnail. I was like, I don't know the guy. I don't have time to get a hold of him. I don't. We'll leave it. He
might come on. He seems to be a lot more of a quiet guy. Like I think he's figured out. Like I'm just gonna post my cartoons on Twitter and get out of here. Like I never see him chit chatting that much. But
he was fairly weirded out even by the whole like live stream interview structure. He's pretty new to all this. So
well, luckily I don't do a traditional interview show. It's more of a fireside chat with everybody.
Yeah.
But he might have some books. Yeah. He might have some books to push. So I'd reach out. He's a cool guy.
Yeah. Anyway, like I saw this illustration and dropping the hammer like it's hot, and I was like, that's an amazing illustration. So, yeah. But I'm not a reformed guy per se, but you got to respect the journey the church has gone through. But
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, anyway,
I'm like that meme where it says me on the political spectrum, and it's like very libertarian. Me when I see a commie, and it like jumps straight up to the far right. So for like Protestant history, it's like my opinion on Luther. My opinion on Luther when I talk to a papist. Yeah, Luther jumps straight up to the Lutheran scale.
So, but like I don't necessarily have that strong reaction just because, like I said, I don't think Protestantism gets the mythology right. We don't understand the depth of the images that we're given. It's too easy to become either an entirely emotional experience where nobody is engaging their minds and therefore not engaging their will. It's like a Sunday feel good thing, or it's an entirely intellectual exercise, right?
Okay, so I resonate with you on like the level of I see this as a problem within Protestantism, but I don't see this as a problem for like I know individual Protestants who do gain like a really what I consider an advanced view of the arts and of the mythic underpinnings of this is why I mentioned Lewis earlier is I think Lewis introduced Protestants to this idea, and Tolkien sort of introduces Catholics to this idea to help us talk to one another about it. So yes, Protestants have sort of like sparse little wooden churches with no art in them. Yeah. But at the same time, we've got Rembrandt on the Protestant side. That's pretty good. Like,
well, and I think that's one of the things, like, getting back to my complicated opinions about Jack Chick, right? He was divisive and his doctrine wasn't always right, but like, he also is, I have to agree with Tenaple on this. He's one of the best horror comic writers of the 20th century. and that's something to think about in that framework. I mean, the as a draftsman and as a comic storyteller, even if I didn't agree with his divisiveness, his comic art is like next level. But yeah.
Boy, he had one foot in the medieval world, so it's I once heard a Luther scholar say, you don't understand Luther unless you can picture yourself walking through the forest and being worried you're gonna bump into a demon on the way.
Yeah.
It's just a different world.
Like, Satan is literally real. My enemies represent Satan. I'm gonna throw an inkwell at him. Take that.
Inkwell, yeah.
So, yeah, definitely. But
this has been good. I hope people check it out. Do we have people here that have been hanging the whole time? I guess we got Evie.
Yeah,
Evie, Carl.
Evie just got here a little bit ago. I'm not sure how long Carl's been here, but this has been a long show. But the other thing is talking about people that Christian artists that get it, and I do think that there are some, and I think that Tenaple is one of them. In fact, one of his most profound theological works is also his most profane, is a Black Cherry, his crime comic, which it's really foul, but it also talks about the nature of humanity really well, and it pulls zero punches. So
yeah, that's the only one I'm interested in buying.
It's virtually high art for being gritty, and like every bit is as gritty as a sleazy 70s film.
Mm-hmm.
So
I haven't read that one yet. Okay.
Oh, it's good.
I'm saving my $25 for Hicks and Bragg. His lost work.
Oh yeah,
that right?
Yeah, he's talking about it. The next project he's releasing is going to be Earthboy Jacobus, though, which I'm excited for.
He's going back to the well, I guess.
Well, that one got a really small release, so it's virtually impossible to find.
Okay, well, that's
he's gonna republish it in hardback format. So. But yeah, that's the whole thing. But yeah, I but like I said, so I have mixed feelings, and also I have a really hard time with Luther's anti-Semitism.
Yeah,
but
I
mean, I understand. One interesting thing about him is the young Luther wrote like a sweet treatise about how the Jews were being mistreated, right? Like, you can't separate Luther's views from Luther's life. Like, he would change his views based on what was happening. So like the Jews get on his nerve, and then he says, "All right, that's it. Now I'm going to write a treatise against them." Right. Same thing with the Anabaptists. Like, I think someone made the point that Luther's prescription for the Jews was that their property would be taken away and they'd be exiled, and his prescription for the Anabaptists was that he'd be drowned, right? So I think Protestants, we kind of have to get used to the idea that most of the, like, quote unquote heroes of Protestantism probably would have burned. But I'm a Baptist, so I would have been burned at the stake or drowned by everybody back then. But you have to get used to this idea that your heroes, you have to take into consideration the good you think they did, and take into consideration their mistakes, their human sins. Yeah.
Right. Well, and that's one of the things to get to is, like, that they're, I think it's dangerous to look at humans as heroes, right? Because we're the heroic is something beyond us. It's something we strive for, but we're not the ideal. We're just us. And I think one of the best examples of this is George Washington, right? Who was like probably the most equitable, most forward thinking in the terms of the way he treated the slaves he had. And he, freed all of his slaves, which is it's more complicated than that, but it's still true. He freed all of his slaves when he died on his death.
Right.
But before he died, he had one slave escape and to go run away to the Northwest Territories to marry a guy. And it was a female slave, and he hunted her down.
Because he didn't understand it. I don't get it. I thought I was a good master. Yeah.
Yeah. Why would you run away from me? Didn't we treat you right? Didn't we take care of you? Didn't we try to encourage you? And she's like, I just want to be free and I want to live with my husband.
Yeah.
He couldn't understand it. And of course, he couldn't take her back because Northwest Territories is no slavery, whole thing. But, but he still was, even though he was so freedom thinking, he thought slavery long-term should be abolished. He was one of those guys. He still couldn't get it. Because he's just a person. He's just a flawed human being. He's just as broken and screwed up as the rest of us. But, and as Evie points out here rightly, Jesus is the archetype, right?
Hey, that's pretty good chaos in order there, eh?
Yeah. It's Jesus, like I said an hour ago. Christ is the sign and the signified, and he alone has that distinction, where he represents the thing that he is, and the rest of us are just approximations, and everything we know is just an abstraction of an approximation. But I think that's a good place to end. What do you think, guys?
Yeah, I think we got you down on a 30-minute rabbit trail there again, right as you were wrapping up.
Yeah, wrap that up quick. So
that was good.
Okay, guys.
Everybody, go check out Kyrie Wild Tales on Indiegogo.
Yeah. Oh, thanks.
Kyrie.
No, at this point, I'm saying Kyrie at this point.
Yeah, that's
part of it's
I asked you how to pronounce it, and you told me pronounce it Kyrie. What did you do to me? Now I feel dumb on the Mattriarchy.
No, I was already transitioning at that point.
Here's the thing: is he started just saying, like when his first campaign, he just started saying, just say whatever, because he got tired of explaining it. But I don't let stuff like that slide. So
good stuff. We're probably gonna hit 6K before we leave. Before we close the campaign, it's 7 days left. 6 now.
Which is awesome.
Yeah, it's a success because it's raised faster than my other two campaigns, and it's easier to fulfill, and it's already paid for. So this was just gravy to pay for future content. I'm trying to do a Tim Lim approach. So
and the fun thing I have to point out to all of you guys who held on here, if you don't think I'm an idiot after tonight's show, you might want to throw down some coin for Matt's book, because I co-wrote one of the stories.
Working on the last page now. It looks amazing.
Of course, if you do think I'm an idiot, then don't hold that against him. The rest of it's probably great.
There's 3 other stories to choose from. If you don't like that one.
So guys, thanks so much for tuning in. This has been an extra long Mattriarchy. We're at 3 hours. We could almost be a radio spot. So, but we're going to call it here, and I've got hours worth of work ahead of me tonight. So that's cool. But thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been great. And Marm, you should come back more often.
I'll try. Yeah. I've been in like, oh gosh, coronavirus work mode. Yeah, but I'll try in the future.
You've been super hard to get a hold of for a whole year to get you in front of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it's a good thing, right? Like when I'm rich off Dogecoin, I'll just retire and hang out in live streams all day.
Well, so, your class, you were an early adopter of I guess like YouTubing about comics, and you are also an early lever of that too.
I mean,
I've always kind of been interested in that.
I'm still doing it. Like, I'm not doing it every day, though, right? Like, because if I do it every day, it's like, oh man, now it's a job. Shoot. It's become like a Monday, Wednesday thing on my comic. And actually, what I'm trying to do is if I have an indie comic, I'm trying to put that to the front of the line. So I'll just like open it up. I call it unbox and review. So I'll unbox it and I'll review it all in one go. Oh, you know what I just remembered I didn't do? I completely meant to review Common America 2. And then I thought, oh no, I know what I'll do. I'll do a really nicely edited one of that next weekend. And then I forgot to do it. And now Common America 3 is out. So I'm going to crank out a Common America 2 and Common America 3 review. But if you like comic reviews, I am still doing them. It's just not the only focus of my channel anymore, but I still do it for you guys because I love you guys. So Mondays and Wednesdays you'll get comic reviews.
There you go,
guys. Don't you miss them saying I love you guys?
No, I go back and listen to the old videos when I feel lonely.
Oh, cool. That's a good idea.
I need a super cut of that with like a dopey feel good soundtrack.
I love you guys. I love you guys.
I love you guys.
Okay, that's a wrap. We're calling it. Good night, everybody.
Cool. Good night, everybody.
Tune in next week for I have no idea what. Bye.
Bye.